Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little closer. Let your eyes soften, let your shoulders drop, and just breathe for a moment. There is nowhere you need to be right now. No deadline waiting. No alarm that matters yet. Just you and Springfield, and the quiet unfolding of a story that has been hiding in plain sight for 36 years. We are going to spend a long, slow, easy night talking about the people who live in that impossible yellow town. And we are going to talk about them the way they deserve to be talked about, carefully, gently, with all the time in the world, following every thread wherever it leads. So let us begin with the man at the center of everything. Homer J. Simpson. You know him. You have known him your whole life, more or less. He is the wide man with the 5 o'clock shadow and the glazed eyes, and the tendency to eat things that are not food. He falls down a lot. He makes terrible decisions with extraordinary confidence. He loves his family with a ferocity that occasionally manifests as accidental strangulation. He works at a nuclear power plant as a safety inspector, a job he performs with essentially zero competence, and he has done this for going on 4 decades without the building imploding. On the surface, Homer Simpson is a joke. But the surface is not where this story lives. The first thing you need to understand about Homer is that he was not always like this. There is a version of Homer Simpson that the show has shown you in glimpses. A Homer who is articulate, curious, emotionally intelligent, capable of genuine insight. This Homer appears in season 12, in an episode where a crayon is removed from his brain, a crayon that had been lodged there since early childhood, quietly pressing against his frontal lobe, reducing his cognitive function the way a thumb presses against a garden hose. Without the crayon, Homer's IQ jumps dramatically. He becomes someone entirely different. He reads books. He writes a detailed report about the environmental damage being done to Springfield by the nuclear plant. He has real conversations with Lisa, who has spent her entire childhood longing for exactly this kind of connection with her father. He understands things. He sees things clearly, and it makes him miserable. Not because intelligence is inherently painful, but because intelligence in Springfield is a cage. Seeing clearly in a town built on comfortable fog means seeing everything that is wrong with your life, your employer, your community, the slow poisoning of your neighborhood, the way the system has been arranged specifically to keep people like Homer compliant and exhausted and grateful for whatever small kindnesses trickle down from above. The smart version of Homer looks at the life the regular Homer lives every single day and finds it unbearable. So he has the crayon put back in. He chooses the fog over the clarity. He chooses warmth over truth. And the show asks you to understand that choice rather than judge it. Because Homer's choice is not weakness, exactly. It is a survival decision made by a man who has been offered 2 versions of his life. One where he can think but cannot bear what he sees, and one where he cannot think but can still feel the warmth of the couch, the weight of the baby in his arms, the cold of the beer on a Friday night, and he picks the one that still has room for joy. That is the emotional core of Homer Simpson. Buried under every donut joke and every pratfall, and every time he drove his car into something that should not have been drivable into, there is this one quiet truth. Homer is a man who chose feeling over knowing because knowing costs too much. But here is where the story gets complicated. Homer did not arrive at that choice in a vacuum. The crayon did not appear in his skull through magic. A child does not lodge a crayon in his own brain and then live for decades without any doctor finding it unless the medical establishment around him was either catastrophically incompetent or quietly looking the other way. And Springfield has a documented, canonical history of both. Think about what kind of childhood Homer had. His mother disappeared when he was young, vanished in the night, no explanation, no goodbye. His father, Abe, was cold and distant and dismissive, in the way that men of that particular generation were taught to be. The kind of father who expressed love primarily through criticism, who told his son stories about the war with more tenderness than he ever managed to tell his son about the boy himself. Homer grew up in a household shaped by grief and silence, a motherless home where nobody talked about the thing that had happened, where the absence at the center of the family was simply never acknowledged, the way you learn to walk around a piece of furniture that has always been there. And then he grew up and found Marge. This is the thing about Homer that gets lost in the noise of all the jokes. His love for Marge is real. It is possibly the most real thing about him. In those moments, the show allows to breathe the anniversary episodes, the moments of genuine tenderness between them. You can see it clearly. Homer loves Marge with the intensity of a man who knows, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, that she is the thing standing between him and complete dissolution. She is the stability he never had. She is the warmth the house never had. She is proof that someone chose him, wanted him, stayed. His terror of losing her is not a character quirk. It is a wound that has been open since the night his mother kissed him while he was sleeping and walked out of his life forever. The show has explored this connection explicitly. In multiple episodes, when Homer faces the possibility of losing Marge through her dissatisfaction, through their growing apart, through the accumulated weight of all the ways he falls short as a partner, he does not react with indifference. He reacts with something close to panic, a deep animal fear that the ground is about to disappear beneath his feet. The man who shrugs off getting hit by a car and drives away laughing becomes genuinely, vulnerably terrified at the idea that Marge might stop loving him, because Marge stopping loving him would mean his mother was right to leave. That is the wound. That is the thing underneath everything else. Homer has spent his entire adult life building a life that proves his abandonment was not deserved. Every morning he wakes up next to Marge is evidence. Every time she reaches for his hand is evidence. Every birthday cake and Christmas morning and summer evening in the backyard is evidence that he is worth staying for, worth loving, worth the effort of all that patience. The irony is that Homer is genuinely worth loving. The show makes this clear again and again. He is not a good employee, not a good citizen, barely a functional adult in most technical senses. But as a father, in those unguarded moments when the jokes fall away, he is something rare. He is present. He shows up. He throws himself headfirst into his children's lives with a commitment that borders on the overwhelming. When Bart is struggling, Homer struggles alongside him. When Lisa needs someone to believe in her saxophone, or her spelling bee, or her environmental cause, Homer shows up, usually having misunderstood the entire situation, but showing up nonetheless. There is an episode where Homer discovers that Lisa has been taking saxophone lessons in secret because she is embarrassed about how her playing sounds. And instead of being hurt or dismissive, Homer sits outside her room in the dark and listens to her practice. He falls asleep against the wall. He stays there all night, and in the morning when Lisa opens her door and finds him there, neither of them says anything about it. He just smiles at her, and she understands what that means. That is Homer Simpson. Clumsy, loud, occasionally catastrophic, but always there. Always finding his way back to the couch, to the table, to the people who somehow, against all reasonable expectation, became his whole world. The floating timeline the show runs on this permanent present where nobody ages, where the same family lives. The same life in an endless loop takes on a specific emotional color when you look at it through Homer's eyes. Because Homer is exactly the kind of man who would, if he could, press pause, not because he is afraid of change, because this, right here, his family in this house on this street, is everything he ever wanted. Everything his childhood told him he could not have. The couch at the beginning of every episode, Homer running from one side of the frame and landing on the cushions next to his family. It is played as a joke, a visual gag, a bit of cartoon business, but if you look at it as something else, as a man who spent his childhood without a family completing, rushing toward the one he built, it hits differently. He runs toward them every time. He always runs toward them. There is another layer to Homer that the show has built quietly across decades, and it connects to the larger world of Springfield in a way that is easy to miss. Homer's incompetence at the power plant is not random. It is specific. He sleeps at his station, eats during emergencies, has caused a documented number of incidents that should have ended his employment long ago, and yet he stays. He is never permanently fired. No matter how badly he performs, no matter how many times Mr. Burns forgets his name and nearly lets him go, Homer always comes back. The explanation, when the show finally gives it, is quietly devastating. Abe Simpson made a deal. At some point in the past, the show is deliberately vague about when Grandpa Simpson witnessed something at the power plant, something that Mr. Burns needed to keep quiet. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's employment, for life, no matter what. The deal was struck without Homer's knowledge, without his consent, as a piece of business between an old man and a billionaire, with Homer as the currency. Homer's job security is not a reward. It is a cage built by his own father, and Abe built this cage out of guilt. Because Abe was the one who told Homer his mother was dead. Abe was the one who covered for Burns, who let the man who destroyed his family also become the man who employed his son. Abe spent decades living with the knowledge that his silence was the price Homer paid for every paycheck, every day spent in that fluorescent-lit room next to the reactor core, every year of Homer's life breathing whatever the plant was exhaling into the air. The question the show never quite gets around to asking is whether Abe told himself this was protection or punishment. Whether giving Homer a job at the plant was an act of love or an act of penance that Homer was never meant to understand. Homer does not know any of this. He cannot connect these dots. He knows Burns is his employer, knows his mother ran from Burns decades ago. He knows vaguely that his family's history is tangled up in the plant's history, but the knowledge sits in separate compartments that never quite touch each other, because Homer's brain does not work that way. The crayon made sure of that. The radiation contributed to that. A lifetime in Springfield, surrounded by people who have collectively agreed not to look too closely at anything, made sure of that. Homer Simpson moves through a world that is arranged against him and experiences it as ordinary life. He does not feel the architecture of his own captivity. He feels the donut and the beer and the warmth of his wife beside him in the dark, and those things are real and they are his, and no amount of burns or radiation or buried family history can make them less real. And maybe that is the saddest and most beautiful thing about him. He built something worth having inside a system designed to prevent exactly that. He found love and family and warmth inside the contamination zone, inside the town Burns controls, inside the loop that was never supposed to let anyone grow. He did not escape Springfield. He did not dismantle the system. He did not wake up and see the architecture and fight back the way his mother did. But he put a couch in the living room and he made it a place worth coming home to. And every Sunday night for 36 years, he runs across the screen and lands on that couch with his family, and the joke plays and the credits roll, and somewhere in a hospital bed or in a contaminated neighborhood or in the quiet of a sleeping town, that small, stubborn act of love repeats itself endlessly. Homer Simpson chose the fog, but he filled the fog with warmth. And maybe, given everything, that is the bravest thing anyone in Springfield has ever done. Before we move on, if you are watching this right now, tell me in the comments what time it is where you are and what part of the world you are watching from. It is nice to know who is out there in the quiet. And if you are enjoying this so far, please subscribe. It helps more than you might think. Now, let us keep going. Section 2. Marge Simpson. The patience that holds everything together. Take a breath. Let your muscles go a little heavier. You do not have to hold anything right now. Marge Simpson stands at the kitchen sink with her rubber gloves on and her tower of blue hair pointed straight at the ceiling, and she is the most underestimated person in Springfield. Not underestimated by the audience, exactly, though the audience has done its share of that over the years. She is underestimated by her own show, because here is the thing about Marge. She is the structure. She is the load-bearing wall. Everything that survives in that family, the warmth, the stability, the sense that home is a real place and not just a location exists because Marge maintains it. Homer falls down and gets back up because Marge is always there when he stands. Bart rebounds from consequences because Marge absorbs the damage. Lisa's idealism persists in a town that punishes idealism because Marge validates it at the kitchen table every night. The show has explored Marge's interiority more than it is usually given credit for. There are episodes, and they are some of the show's best, where the camera follows Marge through a crisis of identity, a moment where she looks at her life and asks, quietly, whether this is what she wanted, whether she made choices or had choices made for her, whether the woman she intended to become is recognizable in the woman she turned out to be. The answer the show keeps arriving at is complicated. Marge loves her family with a completeness that is real and not performed. But she also had ambitions, a voice, a self that existed before the house on Evergreen Terrace and the kitchen and the rubber gloves. She wanted to be an artist. She had genuine talent, not the polite fiction of parental encouragement, but actual technical ability, actual creative vision. There is an episode where a painting she does of Mr. Burns becomes a centerpiece of a gallery show, where professional critics respond to her work with the seriousness it deserves. She has the ability. She has the eye. But she has also internalized the idea deeply, without ever quite deciding to do so, that her needs are secondary, that her ambitions are a luxury the family cannot afford, that the woman who wants things for herself is a threat to the woman who holds everything together. This is not Homer's fault. Exactly. The show is careful about this. Homer does not demand Marge's self-erasure. He is thoughtless about it rather than deliberate. He does not say, "Put your dreams away and be my wife." He simply assumes the kitchen will be clean, and the laundry will be done, and the world of the household will function because it always has. And because it always has, he never asks why. The labor is invisible. The maintenance is invisible. Marge's effort is invisible, which means Marge herself in some essential way is invisible. There is a recurring anxiety in Marge's storylines that the show handles with more grace than it is typically credited for. The anxiety of being seen as the boring one, the responsible one, the person who worries about consequences while everyone else is having fun. In a household with Homer's chaos and Bart's rebellion and Lisa's passion and Maggie's silent intensity, Marge is the one who says, "Slow down, be careful, think about what you are doing." And being that person is exhausting in ways that comedy rarely acknowledges, because the responsible one is never the funny one. The responsible one does not get the big laugh. She gets the eye roll, the impatient sigh, the chorus of everyone groaning because she is bringing up the boring thing again. And over time, if you are not careful, you start to believe that the eye roll is accurate, that the boring thing is you. Marge has teetered on this edge more than once. The show has depicted her frustration, her longing, her occasional flare of resentment at the way her household operates. There are moments where she almost leaves, moments where she almost chooses herself over the family. And every time, she comes back, not because she has surrendered, but because she has decided actively that this is what she wants. The family is her work. The house is her creation. The love she has built is real. But the show is honest enough to show us the cost. One of the most quietly devastating things the series has ever done is the depiction of Marge's anxiety. In several episodes, her compulsive need for cleanliness, her elaborate worry spirals, her tendency to catastrophize small problems into enormous ones. These are presented initially as character quirks, things to be laughed at. But the show eventually acknowledges what these behaviors actually are. Marge has anxiety. Real, diagnosable, persistent anxiety that manifests as hypervigilance, as perfectionism, as an inability to let small things stay small. And when you think about her life, the husband who requires constant monitoring, the son who manufactures crises, the daughter who shoulders the emotional weight of the world, the community that is slowly poisoning itself, the boss who controls her husband's entire existence, the history of chaos and upheaval that is Springfield's normal operating mode, her anxiety is not irrational. It is a rational response to an irrational environment. Marge has anxiety because she is the only person in her household who is paying attention to all of it at once. She carries the information burden of the entire family. She remembers the dentist appointments and the school deadlines and the neighbor's birthday and the bill that needs to be paid and the conversation from 3 weeks ago that Homer has entirely forgotten, but that Marge knows is still unresolved. She holds the family's continuity. She is the living archive of their shared life, and she maintains this archive entirely without acknowledgement, without assistance, without anyone stopping to ask whether the archive needs tending. There is a version of Marge's story that is quite dark. In this version, Marge gave up her potential not because she made a choice, but because she never quite had the chance to make one. She got pregnant young. She married a man who needed her in a way she could not walk away from. She built a life around her family's needs because her own needs were never organized enough, never urgent enough, never quite able to elbow their way to the front of the line. The show does not fully commit to this version. It maintains the ambiguity. Marge chose Homer. Marge chose this life. The choice was real, but it also acknowledges in those quieter episodes that the choice was made under circumstances that did not give her all the information she needed. She did not know, when she married Homer, that she would spend decades being the one who holds everything together. Nobody told her that was the job description. She figured it out along the way and decided she was willing to do it anyway. And here is where Marge becomes genuinely moving rather than merely sympathetic. Because she does not do the work of the family reluctantly, she does it with a generosity that is almost alarming in its completeness. When Homer fails, which is often, and spectacularly, Marge does not catalog the failure and present it back to him. She processes it, absorbs it, and finds the thread of who he is underneath the failure and pulls on that thread until he comes back to himself. She does this over and over across 36 years without apparent exhaustion. This is not passivity. It is a choice, an ongoing, active choice to see the person rather than the performance. To love the Homer underneath the chaos rather than giving up on him because the chaos is persistent. There is a theory among fans gentle, well-supported, quietly compelling that Marge has known about the crayon in Homer's brain for much longer than the show lets on. Not as a medical fact, but as a felt sense. A knowledge that the person she married is not operating at the level he should be, that there is a gap between who Homer is and who Homer could be, and that the gap is not his fault. That she has been compensating for this gap for decades without naming it, because naming it would change things in ways she is not ready for. Whether or not you accept this reading, it illuminates something true about Marge. She has spent her marriage building a life around what Homer actually is, rather than what he theoretically should be. She has adjusted, accommodated, improvised. She has loved him in the real rather than the ideal. That kind of love, practical, patient, persistent, is actually harder than the grand romantic gesture. The grand gesture costs you a moment. Marge's version costs you every morning. Her relationship with her daughters is one of the show's most interesting ongoing threads. With Lisa, it is complicated in specific and recognizable ways. Marge loves Lisa completely, but she does not always understand her. Lisa's intelligence, her passion, her refusal to accept the world as it is, rather than as it should be. These qualities are things Marge respects from a distance. The way you respect a talent you do not share. She cannot follow Lisa into the places Lisa goes intellectually. She cannot match Lisa's philosophical depth or her musical sensitivity or her commitment to causes that the rest of Springfield finds exhausting. What Marge can do is be there. Show up, bake the thing, drive the carpool, sit in the audience and applaud. Love the person even when the person's interior world is somewhat beyond her reach. With Maggie, the relationship is different, and in some ways more instinctive. Marge and Maggie communicate in the pre-verbal language of mothers and infants in the quality of touch, in the rhythm of holding, in the way Marge reads Maggie's expressions with an accuracy nobody else in the family approaches. If Maggie's silence is strategic, as some theories suggest, then Marge is the person whose attention that strategy is most specifically designed to evade. Because Marge sees Maggie. She just does not know exactly what she is seeing. And Bart? The relationship between Marge and Bart is the one that breaks your heart the most consistently because it is the clearest picture of what unconditional love actually requires. Bart is loud and difficult and destructive and draws negative attention the way a lightning rod draws storms. He is the child who costs Marge the most social capital, the most exhaustion, the most genuine fear for his future. Teachers call, principals call. Parents of other children call. The world offers Marge a continuous editorial on what Bart's behavior means and what kind of mother she must be to have produced him. And Marge refuses every single one of those editorials. She knows Bart. She knows the soft interior under the performance of rebellion. She knows that the kid who draws on walls and talks back to authority and creates chaos wherever he walks is also the kid who, in the quiet of the house at night, comes looking for her, who sits with her in the kitchen, who still needs, despite every performance of not needing, to be held inside someone's certainty that he is okay. Marge provides that certainty. Not through speeches, not through lectures, not through the long conversations about behavior and consequences that make up so many of their interactions. She provides it through presence. She is reliably there. That is the anchor. That is the thing Bart can push against because he knows it will hold. The show has given Marge moments of genuine self-expression across its run. The painting, the journalism, the brief career in real estate, the season where she plays keyboard in a band. These episodes tend to follow a similar arc. Marge discovers something she is good at, something that feeds a part of herself that the domestic life does not reach. And then the thing gets complicated and she has to choose between it and the family. The resolution is always some version of finding a balance, but the balance is always, in the end, weighted toward the family. Some viewers find this frustrating. They want Marge to go further, to hold on to the thing, to claim it as her own, and refuse to give it up, and their frustration is not without basis. But there is another way to read these episodes. Marge is not always retreating. Sometimes she is choosing. And the show is trying, imperfectly, to honor the fact that choosing family over ambition is not automatically a defeat. That the life Marge has built is a creation of its own. That the love she maintains is work real work, and that it produces something this family, this household, this impossible, resilient warmth that survives everything Springfield throws at it that has genuine value. Marge Simpson stands at the sink with her rubber gloves on and she holds everything together, and the show almost never stops to say thank you, and neither do the people she is holding together, and she knows this, and she keeps doing it anyway. That is not weakness. That is the most difficult kind of strength there is, the kind that does not announce itself. The kind that shows up in the ordinary morning and the unremarkable Tuesday, and the small daily acts of choosing to stay and trying to understand, and deciding that the warmth you build is worth the cost of building it. Marge Simpson is the reason there is a home to come back to, and the loop continues because she keeps the door open. You can breathe a little slower now. Let the weight of the day settle somewhere underneath you. There is nothing to solve tonight. Bart Simpson was, at his inception, a genuine cultural phenomenon. The kid on the skateboard with the slingshot in his pocket and the defiant grin. He was printed on t-shirts and lunchboxes. He was quoted on playgrounds across the English-speaking world. He was, briefly, considered a social problem too rebellious, too disrespectful, a bad influence on the children who were watching him, and learning that talking back to authority could be funny rather than punishable. Some schools banned those t-shirts. Some parents forbade the show. What is interesting about this, looking back, is how completely the panic missed the point. Because Bart Simpson is not actually a celebration of mindless rebellion. He is a portrait of a kid who rebels because it is the only tool he has been given, who performs confidence because confidence is the only armor that works, who makes noise because the alternative, being quiet and invisible in a family that does not quite know what to do with him, would be worse. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. He is perpetually in a moment of childhood that comes after the innocence but before the understanding. That age where the world has gotten complicated and you are supposed to be figuring it out, but nobody has given you the manual. He exists in permanent suspension between child and person, always almost understanding something, always just on the edge of becoming somebody. And because he never gets to cross that edge, because the floating timeline locks him in place, his rebellion never resolves into either wisdom or consequence. He is always in the middle of the story, the part where things are messy and the outcome is unclear, which means we never get to find out who Bart would become. The show has glanced at this question through flash-forward episodes. The best of them, Bart to the Future, shows an adult Bart who is drifting, underachieving, living in the shadow of his sister's success. A man who never quite connected the energy of his childhood to anything productive. The episode is melancholy in a specific way. The way it is melancholy to see someone you rooted for arrive at a version of their life that is smaller than they deserved. But the show pulls back, returns to the present, locks the door on that future and returns Bart to being 10, the potential preserved in amber, the question unanswered. There is a heartbreaking thread in Bart's relationship with intelligence that the show has always handled delicately. Bart is not stupid. The show has established this directly in moments where Bart applies himself. He demonstrates real capability. He is street smart in ways the show depicts as genuine intelligence rather than the consolation prize it is sometimes treated as. He reads people accurately and quickly. He improvises with remarkable creativity under pressure. He understands social dynamics with an instinctive precision that Lisa, for all her book knowledge, frequently lacks. But Bart has been told, by school and by circumstance, and by the accumulated weight of 1,000 small failures, that he is the dumb one, the troublemaker, the kid the teachers have already written off before he opens his mouth. And at some point, early enough to matter, he internalized that assessment and built a performance around it. If everyone expects the class clown is what they get. If the system has already decided you are a failure, you can at least choose how you fail. You can make the failure big and loud and entertaining enough that it feels like something you chose, rather than something that happened to you. This is a survival strategy. Not a particularly effective one, but a recognizable one, and one that Bart has refined over decades to something very close to an art form. His relationship with Homer is the show's most complicated, ongoing relationship. These two people drive each other insane in ways that are simultaneously funny and painful. Homer's go-to response to Bart's misbehavior, the strangulation gag, is played as comedy, but underneath the comedy there is something real. And something troubling, a father who has not developed the tools to respond to his son's behavior in any way that works, defaulting again and again to physical frustration because nothing else is landing. And Bart provokes it, deliberately sometimes, because even a frustrated response is attention. Even the strangulation is Homer choosing to engage with him rather than walk out of the room. There are episodes that strip this dynamic down to its bones and show you what is underneath. One of the most famous is the Season 8 episode where Homer genuinely considers whether he loves Bart. He goes through a genuine crisis of parental doubt, wondering whether the bond he is supposed to feel is real or performed, whether he loves his son or is merely obligated to him. The episode is played for laughs, mostly, but the fact that it exists at all, that the show was willing to ask that question about a father and his child, says something about how seriously it took the tension between them. The answer the episode arrives at is yes, Homer loves Bart, profoundly and without reservation, but the love is complicated by the fact that Bart makes it very difficult. Not impossible, difficult. And Homer does not have the emotional vocabulary, or the patience, or the capacity for the kind of creative parenting Bart actually needs. What Bart needed, and occasionally found, was someone who believed in him before he had earned it. The show revisits this theme through teachers, coaches, authority figures who look at Bart and see the potential underneath the performance. These episodes are among the most emotionally potent in the series, because Bart's response to genuine belief is instant and total. He does not play it cool. He does not pretend not to care. When someone looks at him and says, "I see you, actually you, the thing underneath the chaos," he gives them everything he has. Mrs. Krabappel is the most important adult in Bart's life outside his family. Their relationship is one of the show's most quietly developed ongoing threads. She is exhausted by him. She has been fighting the battle of Bart Simpson for years and losing. She has graded the same bad test papers and sat through the same disruptive moments and written the same notes home. But she also knows him. She knows when the disruption is genuine restlessness and when it is performed. She knows when he is struggling under the noise. And occasionally, in the episodes that are willing to be quiet enough to show it, she chooses him anyway. Her death in the real world, the passing of Marcia Wallace, who voiced her, was acknowledged by the show in a way that was genuinely moving. Bart writing her name on the blackboard. No punchline. Just a name. Bart and Lisa's relationship is one of the show's great ongoing dynamics, and it deserves more attention than it typically gets. On the surface, they are opposites, the troublemaker and the achiever, the noise and the quiet, the one who breaks the rules and the one who memorizes them. Their interactions tend toward mutual exasperation, a kind of constant low-level sibling friction that the show mines for comedy. But underneath that is a bond that is specific and real, and occasionally allowed to surface in ways that stop the show's comedic engine entirely. They understand each other in ways nobody else in the family does. They have grown up in the same strange environment, negotiating the same impossible household, developing their different survival strategies side by side. Bart understands Lisa's loneliness even when he teases her about it. Lisa understands Bart's intelligence even when she criticizes his choices. In the episodes where they team up, genuinely cooperate, pool their very different skill sets toward a shared goal, they are formidable. Bart's social fluency and Lisa's analytical intelligence together produce something neither of them could manage alone. The show does not use this combination often enough, and that is a shame, because those episodes tend to be among the series' best. There is a darkness in Bart's storyline that the show circles without fully landing on. Bart has been getting into serious trouble since before the series began. He has committed acts that would have genuine legal consequences for anyone not protected by cartoon logic. He has caused property damage, public disorder, genuine harm to specific individuals. He has done things that, in the real world, would result in intervention, counseling, a professional assessment of what exactly is going on with this child. What Bart has never received is the thing he actually needs, which is someone sitting him down in a quiet room and asking, without judgment or agenda, what is actually going on with him? What is driving this? What he is afraid of? What he is trying to avoid feeling by creating enough chaos that there is no room for feelings at all. The show gestures toward this a few times. There are episodes where a professional enters Bart's orbit and offers something like genuine therapeutic engagement, and Bart's response suspicious, defensive, Gradually opening suggests that the capacity for that kind of connection is there. It has always been there. He just needed someone patient enough to wait for it. Instead, he gets the cycle: misbehavior, consequence, reset, repeat. The permanent presence of Springfield ensures that Bart never accumulates enough consequences to have to change. He never reaches the breaking point that would force the genuine reckoning the show can see he needs. He is perpetually one episode away from having to become someone different, and the loop always resets before the bill comes due. And so he remains 10 years old, skateboard in hand, grin in place, performing the rebellion because the rebellion is the only thing he has figured out how to do that gets him noticed, gets him remembered, gets him treated as a person rather than a problem. Bart Simpson is waiting for someone to show him another way. The tragedy is that the show keeps writing that person into his life and then taking them away when the episode ends. What would Bart become if someone stayed? We never find out. The loop will not let us. Section 4. Lisa Simpson, the loneliest genius in Springfield. Settle in a little deeper. Let your thoughts slow down. There is no rush here. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she has always been 8 years old, and she always will be 8 years old. And she knows she has always known, at some level that predates language, that this is wrong. That time is supposed to move. That people are supposed to grow. That the world she is living in is not operating the way the world is supposed to operate, and that she is the only one who finds this distressing. That is Lisa's defining condition. She sees what is actually there. She perceives the gap between how things are and how they should be, and she cannot stop perceiving it, cannot file it away and go watch television and eat a snack and let the discomfort dissipate. The gap demands response. The wrongness demands correction. Lisa cannot look at injustice and shrug. The shrug does not appear to be available to her. This is her gift. It is also, in the specific environment of Springfield, a kind of punishment, because Springfield rewards the shrug. Springfield has built its entire social fabric around the collective decision not to look too closely at things. The three-eyed fish swims in the river, and the town shrugs. The principal turns out to be an imposter, and the town votes to keep the imposter and exile the truth. The nuclear plant leaks, and the neighbors go inside and close their windows and pour themselves a drink. The shrug is survival in Springfield. The shrug is how you get through the day without screaming. Lisa cannot shrug. She has tried. The show has given her episodes where she attempts to disengage, to stop caring, to let the world be wrong without making it her emergency. These episodes always end the same way. Something calls her back. Something she cannot ignore. The mechanism in her that responds to injustice fires, and she is right back in the middle of it, saxophone in hand, making the case for what should be. Her intelligence is portrayed with remarkable specificity across the series. She is not gifted in the generic way that television children are sometimes gifted good at everything, precocious in the way adults find charming. She is gifted in particular ways that have particular costs. Her verbal intelligence is extraordinary. She can construct an argument with a precision that most adults cannot match. Her emotional intelligence is also high, sometimes uncomfortably, so she perceives what people are feeling with an accuracy that can feel invasive. That makes people around her uncomfortable, in the way that being seen makes people uncomfortable. Her social intelligence is the piece that does not quite fit with the other pieces. She understands people intellectually but does not always understand how to be with them. She says the true thing when the social contract requires the comfortable thing, and the true thing lands badly, and she cannot understand why people prefer the comfortable lie to the accurate statement. This is the gap between intelligence and wisdom, and Lisa spends most of her childhood in it. She is profoundly lonely. The show is honest about this in ways that are occasionally heartbreaking. Lisa's friendships tend to be temporary. They appear in single episodes, serve the story of that episode, and then dissolve back into the background of Springfield without trace. The show does not give her a millhouse, a permanent companion who is always there. She moves through her social world in a state of essential isolation, surrounded by people who find her exhausting or intimidating or simply too much. Even at home, where she is loved genuinely and completely, she is somewhat alone. Homer loves her but cannot follow her where she goes. Marge loves her but does not quite understand her. Bart loves her in the complicated way of siblings who are too different to be close but too bonded to be strangers. Maggie, the only one in the family who might match her intelligence, cannot yet speak. Lisa has spent her entire life waiting for someone to talk to at the level she actually thinks at, and the show has been very careful about how it handles the rare moments when that happens. There is an episode where she connects with a substitute teacher, a young man played by Dustin Hoffman, credited as a pseudonym who actually engages with her ideas, who takes her seriously as a thinker, who treats her like a person rather than a precocious oddity. Her response to this is enormous and immediate, and touches something in her that her regular life never reaches. The episode does not give her a crush, exactly. It gives her something more specific and more painful than a crush. It gives her the experience of being truly seen. And then it takes that experience away because the substitute leaves, because he is a substitute, and Lisa has to return to the classroom, where she is once again the too smart kid in the front row who makes everyone around her feel slightly inadequate. Her relationship with her saxophone is the show's most sustained meditation on the relationship between genius and emotional life. Lisa plays the saxophone with a feeling that the show consistently depicts as exceeding what an 8-year-old should have access to. She plays with sorrow, with longing, with an emotional depth that her age does not seem to permit. The saxophone is the place where her intelligence and her feeling converge, where she does not have to translate one into the terms of the other, where they can exist simultaneously without the gap between them. Jazz, specifically. The show chose jazz for Lisa with intention. Jazz is the music of people who understand sadness structurally, who can play sadness not as a single sustained note, but as a conversation between notes, a dialogue between what was expected and what arrived instead. Jazz musicians are improvisers. They understand that the plan will not hold, that the real music happens in the space between the plans, that the gap between what should be and what is, the gap that torments Lisa in every other area of her life, is in jazz a place of creative possibility rather than failure. When Lisa plays, she is okay. When Lisa plays, the loneliness has somewhere to go. There is a connection between Lisa's intelligence and the show's larger theories about Springfield that is worth sitting with. If the radiation theory is correct, if the nuclear plant has been mutating the population, then Lisa represents the mutation that goes in the other direction from Homer. Where Homer's intellect was suppressed, Lisa's was amplified. Where Homer cannot think clearly, Lisa cannot stop thinking. They are the same cause producing opposite effects, two data points in the same experiment, living in the same house. And under the coma theory, Lisa takes on an even more specific weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every character in Springfield is a product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to the people it loves, then Lisa is Homer's dream of the daughter he hopes she will become. The dream of a father who knows, somewhere in his sleeping mind, that he has not been there the way he should have been, that the intelligence Lisa has is being wasted in a house where nobody can meet it, that she deserves better. So he dreams her magnificent. He dreams her as a person who will survive whatever Springfield throws at her, who will carry the thing that nobody else in the family can carry, who will eventually, somehow, find the world she belongs in. In the coma, Homer cannot watch Lisa grow up, so he dreams the version of her that he believes will be okay, even without him there to see it happen. He dreams her smart enough to escape. The show has given us glimpses of the woman Lisa becomes. In flash-forward episodes, she is remarkable, accomplished, principled, fighting the same fights with an adult's tools. She becomes the president. She becomes a musician. She becomes someone who changed things, who mattered, who took the restless intelligence of that 8-year-old girl and aimed it at the world. But in Springfield, in the permanent present, she is still 8, still at her desk, still raising her hand, still waiting for a question worth answering. Her activism is one of the show's most persistent and loving character threads. Lisa has devoted her visible life to causes environmental protection, animal rights, vegetarianism, feminism, the general improvement of Springfield's relationship with the truth. She loses most of these battles, at least in the short term. Springfield is not a town that reorganizes itself around one 8-year-old's moral convictions, no matter how well supported those convictions are. But she keeps going, episode after episode, cause after cause, argument after argument. She takes each setback and absorbs it and comes back with the next case. This persistence is not naive. The show is careful about this. Lisa knows she is unlikely to win. She knows Springfield's capacity for collective amnesia. She knows that her victories, when they come, will be partial and temporary, and that the forces arrayed against them are enormous and entrenched. She knows all of this, and she makes the argument anyway. Because the argument matters even when it does not win. Because speaking the truth matters even when nobody listens. Because the alternative staying quiet, accepting what is, performing the shrug that Springfield requires would be a kind of death. A death of the specific person she has decided to be. Lisa Simpson is the conscience of Springfield. She is also its loneliest resident. She holds both of these things simultaneously, with a dignity that her age should not yet be able to support. She is 8 years old, and she has always been 8 years old, and the world she lives in is wrong, and she knows it, and she is going to say so again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after that, until someone finally listens. That is not tragedy. That is the most specific kind of hope. Section 5. Maggie Simpson, the silent observer. Let the sound of this voice be the only thing carrying you now. Everything else can wait. Maggie Simpson has not spoken a meaningful sentence in 36 years, and she may be the smartest person in Springfield. That sentence gets more interesting the longer you sit with it. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old since before many of the people watching this were born. She cannot walk without falling over. She cannot communicate in language. She cannot open doors or drive cars or perform any of the physical actions that adult life requires. By every external measure, she is the most helpless member of a family that includes a man who once put a crayon in his own brain and a boy who has been suspended from school enough times to fill a small trophy case. But watch her. Actually, watch her when she appears on screen. Watch the eyes. They are always moving, always following the conversation, tracking the emotional temperature of the room, absorbing everything that is said and a great deal that is not. Watch her in crowd scenes, in the background of the Simpson house, in the spaces where nobody is paying her particular attention. She is never passive. She is always processing. There is an episode, a theatrical short called The Longest Daycare, nominated for an Academy Award that strips away everything else and shows you exactly who Maggie is when nobody is watching. The plot is simple. She is dropped off at a daycare facility that operates with something like authoritarian efficiency. She encounters a caterpillar about to form a cocoon, a fragile and hopeful thing. Another baby, a recurring antagonist named Gerald, the one with the single eyebrow, wants to destroy it. Maggie decides to protect it. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie demonstrating strategic thinking, environmental assessment, improvisation under pressure, and the ability to predict other people's behavior and plan around it. She moves through the facility like a small person who has identified the problem, formulated a solution, located the obstacles, and is now systematically addressing them in order of priority. She does this without speaking a word. She does it with a physical limitation that means every move costs her more effort than it would cost anyone older. She stumbles and recovers and keeps going. She is repeatedly interrupted and redirected, and she recalculates without visible frustration. At the end, she succeeds. The butterfly escapes. The butterfly is free. The episode is lovely on its surface, a simple story about a baby protecting a small, beautiful thing. But what it actually is, if you are willing to look at it that way, is a character study of the most remarkable kind. 7 minutes of demonstrating, without a single line of dialogue, that this person is operating at a level her surroundings do not reflect and her family does not fully see. Maggie's silence has been the subject of genuine debate among fans of the show since its earliest seasons. The standard reading is that she is a baby. Babies do not talk. This is not a mystery. But the show has complicated this reading enough times that the standard explanation feels insufficient. Her first word was daddy. It was spoken in a moment of genuine emotional weight, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a brief cameo appearance. It was never repeated. The show acknowledged it happened and then moved on, and Maggie went back to silence, back to the pacifier, back to the enormous eyes that miss nothing. Why? One theory, quiet, sustained, well supported by the show's own evidence, is that Maggie's silence is a deliberate choice. A strategic decision made by a mind intelligent enough to recognize that in the Simpson household, in Springfield generally, being noticed is dangerous. Watch what happens to people in this family who make themselves visible. Homer gets noticed and gets exploited. Bart gets noticed and gets punished. Lisa gets noticed and gets dismissed. The one Simpson who has never been exploited, never been punished, never been dismissed as irrelevant, is the one who sits in the background and says nothing. Maggie has watched her sister fight for recognition her entire life. She has watched Lisa's intelligence become a source of isolation, a thing that marks her as different and therefore threatening, a quality that the people around her do not reward but instead resent. The smartest person in the family is also the loneliest person in the family, and Maggie has had a front row seat to this equation. The conclusion she appears to have drawn is elegant in its simplicity. She will not make that mistake. She keeps the intelligence hidden. She maintains the performance of helplessness. She presents the world with a baby, enormous eyes, persistent pacifier, occasional tumble across the floor, and the world accepts this presentation and stops looking. And in the space where the looking stopped, Maggie operates without constraint. She saves the family. She solves the problems. She shoots the billionaire when he tries to steal her lollipop. Speaking of which, the shooting of Mr. Burns is the event that defined Maggie in the public consciousness, and we covered it in the earlier section about the mystery itself. But there is something specific to Maggie worth sitting with here. Whether or not she intended to fire that gun, whether the shot was accidental, as the official story claims, or deliberate, as the evidence suggests, the aftermath tells you everything about who she is. She is identified as the shooter. An investigation is conducted, evidence is examined, and then she is cleared, not because she is innocent, but because she is a baby. Chief Wiggum's conclusion is that no jury would convict an infant. She is untouchable by consequence. She walks away from having shot a billionaire without a single lasting repercussion. And then, in the final shot of the episode, she is alone in the room. She looks around carefully. She confirms that no one is watching. And she moves her pacifier in a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger. That is not reflexive behavior. That is not a baby randomly moving her mouth. That is someone who understands exactly what they did, exactly why the gesture matters, and exactly why the moment to perform it is a moment of confirmed solitude. That sequence requires situational awareness, memory, causal reasoning, and impulse control. The capacity to feel the satisfaction of the memory, and also the discipline to wait for a private moment before expressing it. These are not infant behaviors. These are the behaviors of someone who has developed a sophisticated understanding of audience and privacy. Maggie is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years, and she has spent that time in a state of perpetual, careful, strategic watchfulness that the people around her have consistently mistaken for passivity. Under the radiation theory, Maggie represents the most extreme positive mutation in Springfield. If the plant's contamination reduced Homer's cognitive capacity, it amplified Maggie's to something beyond the show's ability to fully depict. She is what happens when the same environmental force that broke one mind instead supercharges another. She is the experiment's most interesting result, and the experiment does not know she exists. Under the coma theory, Maggie is Homer's deepest prayer about his youngest child. If he is dreaming, if the whole of Springfield is a mind trying to hold on to the people it loves, then Maggie's gifts are not a mutation, they are a father's hope. He cannot see her grow up. He cannot know what she becomes. He cannot be there for the first steps, the first words, the whole expanding arc of a person he helped bring into the world. So he makes her extraordinary in the dream. He makes her capable. He makes her someone who will be okay even without him there to protect her. Her genius, in the coma reading, is not a character trait. It is a love letter from her unconscious father. But there is another way to read Maggie that is not theoretical, not dependent on broader Springfield lore, not about radiation or dreams. Just about her. Maggie is watching something. She is gathering something. She has been observing the world around her, absorbing its patterns, learning its rules, cataloging its failures and its possibilities. For 36 years, she has seen what works and what does not. She has seen the traps her siblings fell into. She has seen the way Springfield responds to visibility and to silence. She is preparing. The show has never told us for what. It has shown us glimpses, the daycare rebellion, the shooting, the occasional moment where the mask slips and the intelligence underneath flares into visibility, but it has never shown us the full picture. The end game, the thing Maggie has been building toward across all this time. Maybe she is waiting for the moment to be right. Maybe she is building a foundation that the people around her cannot see because they are not looking in the right places. Maybe she is the only person in Springfield who has understood the entire situation, the radiation, the corruption, the way the town has been arranged to prevent its own rescue and has been quietly, patiently working out what to do about it. Or maybe she is simply watching, simply learning, simply becoming, at an age when nobody expects anyone to become anything. Maggie Simpson is the youngest member of the family and the most unknown. After 36 years, she remains the most mysterious, the most withheld, the most full of potential that has never been fully expressed. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous eyes, something extraordinary is waiting. We just have not been patient enough to see it yet. You are still here. Good. Let yourself sink a little further into wherever you are resting. We are going somewhere darker now, but slowly. You are safe. Charles Montgomery Burns is somewhere between 100 and 140 years old, depending on which episode you are using to calculate, and the exact number is less interesting than the fact of it. A man has been alive for over a century. He has been running a nuclear power plant, manipulating a community, buying politicians, corrupting institutions, and maintaining his grip on a town he essentially owns for all of that time. And he has done it while being physically incapable of opening a jar. His body is a ruin. He is skeletal in a way that suggests the skeleton itself is losing the argument with entropy. His skin is the color of something that has been kept out of sunlight for longer than skin was designed to manage. His eyes are filmed. His voice has passed through so many registers of age that it has arrived somewhere beyond elderly and settled into something else, not old exactly, but ancient, the voice of something that predates the world it currently inhabits. He is the least physically imposing person in Springfield. He is also the most powerful person in Springfield by a margin that makes the comparison meaningless. Burns does not need physical strength because he has never had to use it. The infrastructure of power he has built across decades of deliberate, patient, meticulous construction does the work instead. His money is physical force. His relationships are physical force. The employment of nearly every working adult in Springfield is physical force. When Burns wants something done, he does not do it himself. He arranges for someone who needs their job to do it for him. And because he has been doing this for over a century, the arrangement is very nearly frictionless. The show has been specific about Burns's age in ways that are easy to miss, because the specifics are distributed across dozens of episodes rather than consolidated. He was born in what appears to be the 1880s, making him a person of the Gilded Age, a product of a moment in American history when the concept of accountability for the extremely wealthy was theoretical rather than practical. He grew up in a world where people like him did not go to prison for things. They went to Congress. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, though served is perhaps too generous a word. The show's depictions of his wartime activities suggest a man who was present for the war in the way that a particularly comfortable observer is present for something unpleasant, and who found ways to profit from proximity without assuming the risks everyone else assumed. He stole $1 trillion bill from the United States government during this period and hid it for decades, which tells you something about his relationship with national loyalty. He knew Howard Hughes. He has described attending events with figures who died before most living Americans were born, described them with the casual specificity of someone describing people they actually knew rather than historical figures they read about. His memory extends back across a landscape of American history that most people encounter only in textbooks. And yet he is alive. He is functional. He is sharp, ruthless, strategically brilliant in the specific way of someone who has had a century to observe how power actually works as opposed to how it is supposed to work. The mechanism of his survival is established in what may be the show's most quietly revelatory episode. The Springfield Files, the X-Files parody, appears to be about an alien sighting in the woods near Springfield. Homer sees a glowing figure with an otherworldly appearance, and the whole town mobilizes around the mystery of what it might be. When the truth is revealed, when the alien is unmasked, it is Burns. Burns, after his weekly medical treatment, wandering the woods in a state of dazed euphoria, his body saturated with whatever the treatment involves, to the point where he emits visible light. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies. He needs it with the regularity of food and water. He schedules his existence around this requirement. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns the nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological processes. He is not just profiting from radiation, he is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by his long proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. Burns is the nuclear age given human form. He is what happens when a human being spends long enough in the orbit of that particular force that the boundary between person and reactor begins to dissolve. The Three Stooges syndrome is the show's most explicit engagement with the specific mechanics of his longevity. In a famous scene, Burns visits a doctor who informs him that he has every disease known to medical science. Everyone. Simultaneously. The doctor's explanation is that the diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one blocking every other one, a biological gridlock in which everything that should kill Burns is being held in check by everything else that should kill Burns. The doorway is too crowded for any single illness to pass through. This is played as comedy. It is also, under the radiation theory, something closer to a clinical description. Burns's weekly treatments do not cure his diseases. They manage them. They keep every illness in precisely calibrated stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing the collapse of the equilibrium that would allow any single condition to advance and kill him. His life is maintained the way you maintain a machine through scheduled servicing, through precision adjustment, through the constant intervention of a system designed specifically to keep him running. And Waylon Smithers is that system. We will spend more time on Smithers in his own section, but the relationship between Burns and Smithers is worth noting here because it illuminates something about Burns that the show's comedy often obscures. Burns is not, in fact, capable of maintaining himself without help. He is almost entirely dependent on the infrastructure Smithers provides. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, monitoring his condition, handling the administrative requirements of his continued existence, Burns would deteriorate rapidly. His body cannot run itself anymore. It requires external management. This means that underneath all the menace, underneath the billion-dollar empire, and the century of accumulated ruthlessness, Burns is fragile, profoundly, existentially fragile. He has compensated for this fragility with such thorough and complete construction of external power that it is easy to forget the trembling thing at the center of it. But it is there. A very old man, maintained by weekly injections and one devoted assistant, holding on to existence with the grip of someone who knows exactly how close the edge is. His relationship with Homer is one of the show's great mysteries, mostly because Burns cannot maintain it in his memory. He cannot remember Homer's name. He has employed Homer for decades, interacted with him in dozens of significant episodes, been affected by Homer's actions in ways that have occasionally altered the trajectory of his plans, and he cannot hold Homer's name in his mind. Every time it should be there, there is a gap where it should be. The show plays this as comedy. The long, absurd pause while Burns reaches for the name. The increasingly ridiculous wrong names he produces instead. Homer's baffled offense at being unmemorable to his own employer. But there is a reading of this dynamic that is less funny. Burns cannot remember Homer because Homer is beneath the threshold of his attention. Not stupid, not nothing, just operating at a level so far below Burns's concerns that the cognitive machinery Burns applies to the problem of Homer cannot find purchase. Burns thinks in terms of leverage, in terms of systemic advantage, in terms of the 1,000-piece chess game he has been playing with American society since before Homer was born. Homer is a pawn. Burns does not memorize the individual pawns, except of course Homer is the pawn Burns chose very deliberately. The safety inspector who does not inspect. The safeguard who does not safeguard. The deal with Grandpa Simpson that ensures Homer never loses his job and never does it well. Burns may not remember Homer's name, but he remembers the architecture of the arrangement that keeps Homer in place. He just does not connect the architecture to the specific face. Or he does, and the forgetting is deliberate. A kind of ongoing performance of ignorance designed to keep Homer in his place, to deny him even the dignity of being remembered, to ensure he knows that no matter how central he is to the plant's operation, he remains invisible. The billionaire who cannot remember your name is telling you something about your value in his world. He is telling you every time. Burns's relationship with Mona Simpson is the key that unlocks his character more fully than anything else the show has given us. Here is the thing that happened. A woman destroyed his biological weapons laboratory. She was a member of a small group of activists who broke in, planted what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, and destroyed the agent he had stored there. She did not do this for profit. She did not do it for personal advantage. She did it because she believed a man manufacturing weapons-grade pathogens in a residential community was wrong, and she was willing to risk herself to stop it. Burns did not forgive this. Burns pursued her for decades. He identified her to the FBI. He used his resources and his connections to ensure she could never come home to her family. He sentenced her to 30 years of running, of hiding, of watching her son grow up from a distance, and never being able to explain why she was not there. He did this because she made him look vulnerable, because she got past his defenses, because she looked him in the face in the chaos of that raid and he saw her clearly and she saw him clearly, and in that moment of mutual recognition, the hierarchy of power that Burns has spent his entire life constructing was briefly horizontal. She was not afraid of him. She helped him up. She treated him as a person in the middle of the situation her group had created, and he could not forgive her for it. Burns cannot tolerate equality. He can manage reverence, contempt, servility, fear. These are all positions that confirm the hierarchy, that place him above or below in ways he can navigate. What he cannot manage is being seen as simply a person, a man who happened to be in a building when it was disrupted, a man who got knocked down and needed a hand up. The moment of Mona helping him was, for Burns, an act of aggression more threatening than anything else she did that night. She took his invulnerability and handed it back to him. He spent 30 years destroying her life in response. This is the face of power that the show is most honest about. Not the cartoonish villainy of blocking out the sun or capturing sea creatures. The quiet, patient, personal cruelty of a man who decided, decades ago, that someone deserved to suffer and who was rich and connected enough to ensure they did. Burns wins. In Springfield, Burns always wins. Not because he is smarter than everyone else, though he is. Not because he is more ruthless, though he is that too. He wins because he has had a century to arrange the world around his winning, to build the structures that ensure the outcome, to invest in the systems that prevent accountability, to own enough of the infrastructure of daily life that nobody can challenge him without also challenging their own employment, their own community, their own survival. Burns is the machine that ran long enough to become the environment, and the people of Springfield live inside him now, breathe the air he maintains, drink the water he has contaminated, and cannot quite figure out why everything feels slightly wrong. Rise. Section 7. Ned Flanders the saint who was never given a choice. Let yourself be very still now. The voice will carry you. Next door to the Simpsons, in a house that is slightly better maintained, slightly more carefully tended, in a yard that does not have the same array of half-finished projects and forgotten equipment that Homer's tends to accumulate, there lives a man named Ned Flanders. And Ned Flanders is the most misunderstood character in the history of this show. He is introduced as a foil. That is his original function. He is what Homer is not: responsible, fit, devout, financially stable, emotionally even. Where Homer defaults to chaos, Ned defaults to order. Where Homer reacts with immediate, unfiltered impulse, Ned responds with patience. Where Homer's relationship with religion is approximate and convenient, Ned's is total and genuine and present in every corner of his life. The easy reading of Ned, the one the show often encourages with its comedy, is that he is the straight man, the paragon, the impossibly good person standing next to the comically flawed person to make the contrast visible. And for the first several seasons, this reading more or less holds. Then the show tells you why Ned is the way he is. And the reading becomes much more complicated. Ned's parents were beatniks. This word, with its specific cultural connotations of the late 1950s and early 1960s, tells you something precise about them. They were people who had organized their lives around the rejection of conventional values, including the conventional value of parental authority. They believed that discipline was a form of oppression. They believed that children should be allowed to express themselves freely, without the imposition of adult norms and expectations. They believed this completely, and they applied it to Ned. Young Ned was violent. The show depicts him as a feral child, genuinely uncontrollable, expressing his inner life in physical and destructive ways because no one had ever taught him that there were other options. He was not a bad child. He was an undisciplined one, which is a different thing. He was a child who had never been shown the containment that makes it possible to have an inner life without needing to express every part of it externally. His parents took him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist, playing this absolutely straight within the show's comedic context, spent years conditioning the aggression out of Ned. Not through therapy exactly, through behavioral modification. Through the systematic rewiring of Ned's responses to the stimuli that triggered his violence. Through the construction, from the outside, of a behavioral cage around the wild child. The show calls the technique the University of Minnesota Spankological Protocol, which tells you something about the decade. The end result was Ned Flanders as we know him. Patient, kind, forgiving beyond all reasonable limit. Unable, at a fundamental level, to express anger even when anger is the only appropriate response. The conditioning was so complete that the pathway from feeling to expression was rerouted. The rage that drove young Ned goes in, but it cannot come out. It does not disappear. It accumulates. When Ned finally breaks in the episode where a hurricane destroys his house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it immediately collapses, the release is cathartic in the way that 30 years of pressure being released at once is cathartic. He says everything. He says every true thing he has been holding inside, with a specificity and precision that suggests he has rehearsed it, that the thoughts have been there all along, perfectly formed, waiting for the cage to fail. He calls out Homer for every specific failure. He calls out Marge, Patty, and Selma, Reverend Lovejoy, everyone who has wronged him and been forgiven by the conditioned part of him that cannot hold a grievance. He is eloquent in his rage. He is precise. He has been keeping detailed internal notes, and then he is institutionalized. This is the moment the show uses to reveal the mechanics of Ned's construction. In the facility, a therapist works with Ned and surfaces the origin, the beatnik parents, the psychiatrist, the behavioral protocol, the cage that was built around a frightened, violent child and that has been holding ever since. The therapist's breakthrough is not to break the cage, but to give Ned a way to live inside it more sustainably, to integrate the rage rather than burying it, to allow himself to feel the things he has not been allowed to feel without it resulting in the complete dissolution of the personality the conditioning created. Ned goes back to being Ned. He goes home. He rebuilds his house. But now you cannot unknow what you know. Every subsequent scene with Ned carries the weight of that backstory. His patience is not natural. It is installed. His forgiveness is not freely chosen. It is the only option the behavioral programming left him. His faith, his generosity, his impeccable maintenance of the social contract, these are not expressions of Ned's character. They are the character that was built in place of the character he would have had. Which raises the question that the show raises quietly and then steps back from. Who is the real Ned Flanders? Is it the patient neighbor who helps Homer no matter how many times Homer makes his life harder? Or is it the man in the facility who said every true thing he had been holding for decades? Is it the devout churchgoer who anchors his entire existence in faith? Or is it the feral child whose energy was redirected but never resolved? The show does not answer this. It does not want to. Because the unresolvable nature of the question is the point. Ned's faith is where the darkness in his character lives most quietly and most persistently. He believes, completely without apparent reservation, in a version of God who is present, attentive, and personally interested in the life of Ned Flanders. His faith is the organizing principle of his existence. It is the explanation for why he absorbs punishment without breaking because there is a plan, because suffering has meaning, because the accounting will come right in the end. And the show, with genuine cruelty, has established that God talks to Homer, not to Ned, to Homer. Homer has met God. Multiple times, in various contexts, the show has staged encounters between Homer and a divine presence that engages with him, converses with him, treats him as a person whose questions deserve answers. God has told Homer things. God has intervened in Homer's life in ways that are canonical, that happened within the show's established reality. God has never said a word to Ned, the man who has dedicated his entire existence to faith and practice and the earnest, daily work of trying to be the person his religion asks him to be. This man gets silence. The man who sleeps through sermons and treats the church as a convenient nap location gets conversation. The show does not offer an explanation for this because there is none that is theologically comfortable. If you take the divine presence in The Simpsons as literal, which the show asks you to do several times, then God's engagement with Homer and silence toward Ned is a fact about the universe. It is the universe saying something that Ned's faith has not prepared him to hear. That the criteria for divine attention are not the criteria Ned has been working toward. That what Homer has, the stumbling, impulsive, frequently disastrous but absolutely genuine warmth he extends to the people he loves, is closer to whatever the universe is actually responsive to than Ned's careful, constructed, installed goodness. It is a brutal theological position, and the show holds it without flinching. Ned lost Maude. His wife died because Homer was dodging t-shirts being fired from a cannon into the bleachers of the Springfield Speedway, and the t-shirts hit Maude instead. The physics of it are almost cosmically absurd. Homer's self-preservation, his instinctive ducking away from discomfort, set in motion the exact chain of events that ended the life of his neighbor's wife. He did not intend it. He did not even notice it happening. He was busy being Homer. Ned forgave him. The conditioning held. The cage held. Ned processed the loss, the grief, the rage that must have been there even if it could not be expressed, and he came back to being Ned, the patient neighbor, the faithful churchgoer, the man who helps even when helping costs him something. He eventually found love again. He married a school teacher named Edna Krabappel, Bart's teacher, the woman who has spent years on the other side of the Simpson family's most difficult relationship. There is something quietly beautiful about this. Ned, who needed someone who understood the work of trying to reach a difficult person. Edna, who had spent years developing exactly that skill in the context of Bart. They understood each other. And then Edna died too. Marcia Wallace, the voice of Edna Krabappel, died in real life, and the show acknowledged her passing, and Ned was left to grieve again. There is a version of Ned's story that the show has been building for decades without fully telling. A version in which Ned Flanders is not the saint who forgives because he is good, but the man who forgives because he has no choice, who holds himself together through faith because the faith is the only thing that gives the suffering meaning, and who wakes up every morning and chooses to be kind, in a world that does not reward kindness because the alternative is becoming something he has been conditioned to be terrified of becoming. The darkness underneath Ned is not cruelty, it is despair. The deep, quiet, carefully managed despair of a man who has done everything right and watched it cost him everything, who has faith that it will make sense eventually and is learning, with each year that passes, to hold that faith a little harder because it is all he has. Homer Simpson does everything wrong and somehow holds on to the people he loves. Ned Flanders does everything right and loses them. They live next door to each other 36 years, and the lesson has not changed. That is either the show's cruelest joke or its most honest observation about how the world actually works. Maybe it is both. Section 8. Mona Simpson, the woman who changed everything by leaving. Let your breathing settle into its own rhythm. You do not need to manage it, just let it be. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was the official story, and the official story was maintained with the quiet, unremarkable consistency of a fact nobody had any reason to question. Abe told Homer his mother died. Abe showed Homer a grave. Homer grieved, in the particular way that children grieve when they lose a parent young. Not loudly, not in a way that could be addressed and processed, but quietly, in the deep place where the shape of the loss becomes the shape of the person. Homer grew up defined by this absence. The show has communicated this through the specific texture of his adult personality rather than through exposition. His desperate need for approval, his terror of abandonment, his tendency to hold on too tightly to the things and people that make him feel safe, his willingness to endure humiliation and exploitation from his employer rather than risk losing the stability his job provides. These are not random character quirks. They are the fingerprints of a childhood organized around the central fact that someone who was supposed to stay did not stay. A child who loses a parent to death grieves the loss, but does not grieve a choice. The parent did not leave. The parent was taken. This distinction matters enormously in how the loss is processed. When Homer believed his mother died, the loss was complete and the grief had a direction. When he discovered his mother was alive, that she had been alive, somewhere, all this time the grief collapsed and reformed as something else. Something that had a choice at its center. She had been there. She had known he existed. She had not come back. The reason, when he finally learned it, was real and legitimate and did not make the wound any smaller. Mona Simpson was radicalized in 1969. This is the show's word, and it is used without apology, because the show is honest enough to acknowledge that what Mona was radicalized toward was correct. The world of 1969 was burning with the specific heat of a country at war with itself. The civil rights movement had been fought, and was still being fought. Vietnam was consuming a generation. The culture was cracking along every fault line at once. A woman who had been living a quiet domestic life in Springfield, a woman who had accepted the shape of that life without fully examining it, encountered the outside world and found she could not look away. She joined a group of activists. The show calls them hippies, which is accurate in the period sense but slightly reductive of their actual project, which was the targeting of a specific facility producing a specific kind of harm. Burns's Biological Weapons Laboratory, a building in Springfield where weapons-grade pathogens were being produced and stored in a residential community by a man with no particular accountability to that community or any other. The raid was successful. The biological agent was destroyed. The antibiotic bomb, a phrase that carries its own particular absurdist comedy, did the job it was designed to do. In the chaos of the operation, Mona made the mistake that defined the rest of her life. She stopped to help someone who had been knocked down. The person she stopped to help was Burns. She looked him in the face, he looked at her, and in that moment, the future was determined. Burns identified her to the FBI. The infrastructure of power he had spent decades constructing, the political relationships, the financial leverage, the institutional connections, was turned toward the project of ensuring that Mona Simpson could not come home. Not because she was a serious threat to him after the fact. The laboratory was already destroyed. The harm was already done. Burns pursued her because she had made him look fallible, because she had seen him reduced to a person who needed help, and because he was a man who had spent his entire life ensuring that this particular view of him was not available to anyone. The pursuit was personal. It was disproportionate. It was the full weight of a billionaire's resources directed at a woman who spent 30 years running, who watched her son grow up from a distance, who was unable to explain herself to the people she loved most because explaining would put them in danger. The scene where Homer and Mona are reunited is one of the show's genuinely great moments. Homer finds her at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is his grave. She has come to mourn her son, not knowing he is alive and standing behind her. The reversal is quiet. The comedy that the show could have made of the moment is almost entirely absent. What fills the space instead is the specific quality of two people encountering each other across a gulf of lost time, trying to find the language for what cannot quite be said. They have decades of not knowing between them. Decades during which Homer became the person he is in the absence of her. Decades during which she became the person she is in the absence of him. The reunion does not dissolve these decades. They are still there. They are just standing in the same place now. What Homer discovers in this episode and the ones that follow is something the show has been building toward without announcing. The man who destroyed his family is his employer. The billionaire whose grudge sent his mother running is the man who signs his paycheck every 2 weeks. The infrastructure of Burns's power is the thing Homer has been sustaining with his labor his entire adult life. And it is the same infrastructure that deprived him of his mother, that shaped his grief and his need and his willingness to endure, that made him the particular broken person who fills the particular role that Burns needed filling. Homer cannot hold this together. The knowledge exists in him, but it does not connect. The crayon prevents the connection. The radiation has done its work. The decades of living inside the fog have made the fog comfortable, and the truth requires the kind of sustained clarity that the fog was always designed to prevent. Mona died in a later season. She died quietly, in a scene that is stripped of comedy, almost entirely Homer beside her, holding her hand, two people who had 30 years taken from them sitting together at the end with whatever remains. The weight of those 30 years is not lifted by the moment. It is present, it presses down, but the moment itself is real. She was there. He was there. After everything Burns did, after everything the system did, after everything that conspired to keep them apart, they were there. That is what Burns could not prevent. in the end. The moment at the end. He could steal 30 years. He could not steal the moment when they ran out of things to steal. Mona's story is not just about Homer. It is about the kind of person who looks at power and says no. Who understands the cost of that refusal and makes it anyway? Who accepts the consequences rather than accepting the wrong? Springfield is a town of people who have accepted the wrong, who have shrugged and gone inside and poured themselves a drink. Mona is the character who refused to shrug. It cost her everything. But the show does not conclude that she was wrong. Her cause was just. The weapons laboratory was real. The harm Burns was manufacturing was real. In the universe of the show, Mona did a good thing, an actually good thing, at an enormous personal cost, for a community that never fully understood what she had done for it. She came back once and had to run again. She came back again and stayed until she could not stay anymore. She died having known her son, having been known by him, having had some portion of the time that was taken from them returned. It was not enough. It was what there was. And the show asks you to sit with the gap between those two things without trying to resolve it, because the gap is the truth of it. Mona Simpson stood up to Burns and lost everything, and it mattered anyway. That has to count for something. It does count for something. In Springfield, where everything resets, where nobody ages, where the same mistakes repeat across decades, Mona's story is the one that does not reset. Homer's grief did not reset when he learned she was alive. His joy at the reunion did not reset when she had to run again. Her death did not reset into something more comfortable. Some things in Springfield do not reset, and the ones that don't are always the ones that involve the truest kind of love. Maybe that is the show's most honest statement about what endures. The radiation cycles, the coma loops, the collective denial maintains. But love the specific kind, the kind that costs something, the kind that refuses to be strategic, that one sticks. Mona proved it. ROORORO. Section 9. Waylon Smithers, the most devoted man in Springfield. Settle in. Let the weight of your body find its rest. We have more ground to cover and there is no hurry. Waylon Smithers has spent his entire professional life in service of one man. Not in the abstract sense of professional loyalty, not in the way that employees of long standing develop an attachment to their employers or their institutions. Smithers's devotion to Charles Montgomery Burns is specific, personal, complete, and in every clinical sense of the word, obsessive. The show has circled the full nature of this devotion for its entire run, acknowledging it in some episodes and sidestepping it in others, allowing it to exist in a state of permanent, partial resolution that mirrors the way many real people live with the parts of themselves that are most difficult to acknowledge. Smithers loves Burns, not just as an employer, not just as the professional relationship that structures his working life. He loves Burns as a person, with the full emotional intensity of romantic attachment, and this love has been the organizing principle of his existence for as long as the show has known him. The show has handled this through years of careful, occasionally coded, occasionally very explicit acknowledgement. There were early episodes where the subtext was kept firmly in the text's margin, where the nature of Smithers's feelings was present but unremarked. Then the show began to acknowledge it more directly. Then, in later seasons, it made it fully explicit. Smithers is gay, this is who he is, this has always been who he is, and the object of his unrequited devotion is his 100-and-something-year-old employer. The unrequited nature of the devotion is important, and the show is clear about it. Burns does not love Smithers in return. Burns does not love anyone in return, in the romantic sense. Burns's emotional range does not comfortably extend to the vulnerability that love requires. He is capable of warmth in specific contexts. There have been moments where his guard has come down and something genuinely human has emerged, but as a sustained emotional state available to another person, love is not something Burns maintains. He keeps Smithers because Smithers is useful. The show has established this. Smithers manages the treatment schedule that keeps Burns alive. Smithers handles the administrative complexity of running a century-old life inside a modern institution. Smithers absorbs Burns's moods, his cruelty, his casual thoughtlessness about the effect he has on the people around him. Smithers is the buffer between Burns and the world, and without that buffer, Burns's existence would become significantly more complicated. Burns also, the show suggests, derives something from Smithers's devotion that he would not frame as emotional need, but that functions like one. the certainty of being the center of someone's world, the reliability of someone whose attention never wavers, the comfort of a presence that is always there without requiring anything that Burns is not capable of giving. Smithers is, among other things, Burns's security system. He keeps the environment around Burns manageable and the threats to Burns's equilibrium at a distance. Without Smithers, Burns would be exposed to the full friction of human interaction in a way that his disposition and his physiology are both poorly equipped to handle. The tragedy of Smithers is layered in ways that the comedy surface of the show only partially conceals. He is a man of genuine intelligence and capability who has subordinated every aspect of his professional and emotional life to a person who cannot reciprocate. He is not a simple character. He has interests, he is a collector of Malibu Stacy paraphernalia, a fact the show deploys for laughs, but that also speaks to a person who has rich inner life that does not get expressed in his working hours. He has friendships, briefly and tentatively. He has humor, warmth, a complexity of character that emerges in glimpses when the camera is not focused on his function as Burns's right hand. But then Burns calls. Or Burns's needs assert themselves in the way that Burns's needs always do, drowning everything else out. And Smithers answers. The show has given Smithers moments of near escape, episodes where he begins to build a life outside Burns, to assert needs of his own, to explore the person he might be if Burns were not the gravitational center around which everything orbits. These episodes tend to follow a pattern. Smithers finds a degree of freedom, finds it clarifying and good, begins to become himself in ways that have been suppressed for decades, and then Burns needs him, or the pull of the devotion becomes too strong to resist, and he comes back. There is an episode where Burns fires Smithers, and the freedom Smithers finds is almost comically joyful. He discovers activities, friendships, a lightness of being that was not available to him in the shadow of Burns. He becomes visibly happier in a matter of days. And then Burns is helpless without him. The show depicts this with a specificity that verges on the clinical. Burns unable to manage the simplest tasks of daily life without Smithers' support, and Smithers comes back. Because Burns needs him. Because Smithers being needed is, in the twisted emotional economy of this relationship, better than Smithers being free. This is recognizable. Not as something specific to the fictional world of Springfield, but as something true about certain kinds of love, certain kinds of attachment, the particular dynamic that develops when one person makes themselves indispensable to another and finds that the indispensability fills a need that nothing else seems to reach. The need to be needed. The need to matter to someone in a way that cannot be easily replaced. Smithers matters to Burns in the most literal possible sense. Burns cannot function without him. Burns would die literally, clinically die, within a week without the treatment schedule Smithers maintains. Smithers is the mechanism of Burns's continued existence. And Burns cannot remember Homer's name. He cannot hold on to the names of most of the people who work for him, but he always knows who Smithers is. He always knows where Smithers is, in the way you always know where the load-bearing wall of the house is, without thinking about it, without having to look. Smithers is the foundation. Burns knows it. Does Burns know what that means to Smithers? Does he understand, somewhere below the surface of his 100-year-old ruthlessness, what his continued existence costs the person who maintains it? The show does not answer this. It is one of the things the show is honest enough not to resolve. There is a genuine warmth in their dynamic, occasional and unplanned, that makes the tragedy of it more complete. Burns is not uniformly cruel to Smithers. He is often thoughtless, often dismissive, often casually oblivious to the effect his moods have. But there are moments quiet, undefended, where something real passes between them. Where Burns behaves towards Smithers with something that, viewed charitably, resembles affection. These moments never last. Burns is not built for their duration, but they happen, and Smithers remembers them, and in the accounting of a life organized around one person, a moment of unguarded warmth from that person carries enormous weight. Smithers chose this. He did not stumble into this devotion accidentally. He has had the opportunity to leave, and he has not left. He has had the opportunity to build a different life, and he has built this one. The choice is real. But it is worth asking, as the show occasionally does, whether the choice was made with full information. Whether young Smithers, encountering the enormous gravitational pull of Burns's world for the first time, had the resources to evaluate what he was choosing. Whether the path from there to here was genuinely free or whether the pull of the devotion, once established, operated like gravity, making the direction feel inevitable even when it was not. Smithers is not a victim. He has agency. He exercises it, consistently, in the direction of Burns. But he might also be a person who found himself in a current strong enough to make the choice feel like not choosing, who has been moving with that current for so long that the movement feels like will. The latest seasons have moved toward giving Smithers something closer to resolution, depicting him seeking love outside Burns, finding it in some episodes, allowing the audience to believe that a life outside the orbit is genuinely available to him. Whether the show commits to this or whether the gravitational pull ultimately wins is a question it has been asking for decades. Waylon Smithers is the most devoted man in Springfield. And devotion, the show has been trying to tell us for 36 years, is not the same thing as love. Devotion can exist without reciprocity. Devotion can survive in conditions where love would have the dignity to leave. Whether Smithers's devotion contains something that deserves a better name, whether it rises to the level of love in the truest sense, whether Burns is capable of receiving it even if he cannot return it, these are the questions the show keeps alive by never answering them. And in their permanent, unanswered state, they say something true about the way certain feelings persist in the absence of resolution. How we can organize entire lives around a feeling that refuses to be resolved. How the devotion can be real and complete and consuming even when the object of it remains out of reach. That, in the end, is Smithers's story. The most devoted man in a town full of people who have decided not to look too closely at anything. Smithers looks. He has always looked, and what he sees keeps him there, year after year, treatment schedule in hand, keeping alive the person he cannot stop loving. Section 10. Principal Skinner, Armin Tamzarian. The man with two souls. Let your eyes stay closed or soft, wherever they are comfortable. Let the voice keep going. There is a man in Springfield who has been living someone else's life for over 20 years, and what makes his story remarkable is not the deception itself, but what the deception reveals about the town that chose to maintain it. The man standing at the front of Springfield Elementary School, wearing the principal's jacket, eating lunch in the principal's office, being called Principal Skinner by every teacher and student and parent who interacts with him, his real name is Armin Tamzarian. He was born nobody in particular, in circumstances that the show depicts with characteristic compassion for its characters, even when those characters have done something deeply wrong. He was a street kid, a petty criminal by early adolescence, a boy from the kind of background that tends to produce one of two outcomes: the person who fights their way out of it into something better, or the person who never finds the door. Tamzarian was somewhere in between, drifting rather than actively failing, when the draft caught him and he found himself in Vietnam with a group of people who included the real Seymour Skinner. The real Skinner was everything Tamzarian was not. He had a home, an identity, a mother who cared whether he came back. He had a name that meant something to someone. He had, in the compressed and clarifying language of wartime, the specific thing that Tamzarian lacked. He was wanted. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian carried the news home. He went to Springfield, found Agnes Skinner, and was in the room when she assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. She had lost everything else. And Tamzarian, a man who had never belonged anywhere, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had spent his whole life being invisible in the specific way of people who have no one to be visible, made a choice. He stayed. He stayed and he became Seymour Skinner. He took the name and the history and the mother and the life, and he wore them the way you wear a coat that was made for someone else. Slightly wrong in the shoulders, slightly wrong in the length, but warm, keeping out the cold of his actual existence, making him, for the first time, a person with a place in the world. He built something real inside the borrowed identity. He built a career, a reputation, a 2-decade record of service to Springfield Elementary that was his own work, his own effort, whatever the name it was done under. He built a relationship with Agnes that was real, even if its foundation was fiction. He became, over time, the thing he had only pretended to be: someone worth having, someone worth staying for. And then the real Skinner walked through the door. The real Seymour Skinner survived his prisoner of war camp. He came home. He came to Springfield, to the school, to the assembly celebrating the 20th anniversary of the principal's service, and he introduced himself. He was polite about it, apparently. He was not there to destroy anything. He was there to reclaim his name, his history, his mother. What happened next is the most extraordinary thing The Simpsons has ever depicted in terms of its honesty about how communities actually work. Springfield held a meeting. They voted. They chose Tamzarian. They chose the fake over the real, the familiar lie over the unfamiliar truth. And then they exiled the real Skinner, tied him to a railroad car, physically removed him from the town, and the judge issued a legal decree making it a crime to ever refer to Tamzarian's real name again, under penalty of torture. The episode was hated. It was called The Moment the Show Broke. The moment the writers stopped caring about continuity, about character integrity, about the audience's investment in what they had been watching. But it is the most honest thing the show has ever done about what Springfield is, because Springfield does not prefer the truth over the comfortable lie. Springfield has never preferred the truth over the comfortable lie. The radiation keeps leaking and nobody investigates. The billionaire steals the sun, and the town shrugs. The principal has been living a false identity for 20 years, and when the truth is literally standing in the room, the town takes a vote and decides to keep the story it knows. The principal and the pauper, as the episode is titled, did not break the show's internal logic. It exposed it. It showed you, in explicit terms, the mechanism behind every reset, every forgotten catastrophe, every time Springfield moves on from something that should have changed everything. The mechanism is not narrative convenience. It is collective choice. It is the town voting, always and implicitly, to maintain the version of reality that is most comfortable. The real Seymour Skinner is the most honest figure in the episode. He comes in with the truth and he is expelled from the community for it. He is tied to a train and sent away. He is the truth dressed in a person, and the town, having assessed the truth, decides they prefer the fiction. Agnes Skinner is the episode's darkest figure, and the show almost lets you miss it. She knows. At some level, she has always known, or suspected, or chosen not to know because not knowing was more bearable. She accepted Tamzarian not because she was deceived, but because she needed to be cared for, and he was willing to do it, and sorting out the details was less important than the warmth of having someone there. When the real Skinner appears, she chooses the man who has been present, she chooses the fake. Not because she cannot tell the difference, but because the real Skinner, after all this time, is a stranger wearing her son's name. Tamzarian is the man who has been her son in every practical sense. Her loyalty is not stupid. It is the loyalty of a person who has decided that presence matters more than origin. That the relationship is the thing, not the documentation. For Tamzarian, the resolution returns him to his borrowed name and his borrowed life, now legally authorized, now deconfused by the town's vote. He goes back to being Skinner. The court has made it official. And he is exactly where he started, a man living inside an identity that was not designed for him, wearing it more comfortably now because the world has agreed to stop pointing out the ill fit. Is he happy? The show does not say, is he at peace? The show does not pursue the question past its comedic resolution. He is there. He is Principal Skinner. He goes back to fighting with Bart, managing groundskeeper Willie, navigating Agnes, eating his pathetically modest school lunches in his modest office. He is home. In the only home he has ever had. And the home is a lie, and he has lived inside it so long that the distinction between the lie and the truth has stopped mattering. Maybe that is what the show wanted to say. Not that the lie is acceptable, but that identity is something we construct continuously out of the material at hand, and that the construction is real even when the material was borrowed. Tamzarian built himself into Skinner over 20 years of daily work, daily choice, daily showing up. That building happened. That person exists. The name under the building was someone else's. The building is his. Springfield voted to keep the building and exile the deed. In a town built on exactly that kind of logic, it was the only possible outcome. Section 11. The side characters, Springfield's hidden depths. You can breathe very slowly now. Let the spaces between thoughts get a little longer. There is so much more of Springfield to wander through. We can take our time. Springfield is a town with an extraordinary population for a fictional community. The show has generated, across its 36 seasons, A cast of secondary and background characters so numerous and so individually realized that many of them have more established personality and history than the leads of shows that lasted 3 seasons. They are the texture of Springfield. They are the thing that makes the town feel like a place rather than a set. Let us wander through some of them. Slowly. There is no hurry. Mo Sislak runs a bar. This is his function in the narrative. He is the bartender, the keeper of the space where Homer goes to drink and talk and avoid thinking about things. In this function, he is a supporting player, a piece of Springfield's furniture. But across decades of episodes, the show has built Mo into something considerably more dimensional than his function suggests. Mo is depressed. The show has been explicit about this. His depression is not played entirely for laughs, though it is often present in comedic contexts. It is depicted as the defining fact of his life, a persistent, grinding unhappiness that his bar does not relieve, that alcohol consumed rather than serve does not resolve, that the company of his regulars ameliorates only slightly. He is a man who has settled for his life in the specific way you settle for something when you have stopped believing anything better is available. His romantic history is a long series of near misses. He has come close, several times, to the kind of connection that might interrupt the depression, that might give him something to organize his existence around, other than the bar and the handful of men who drink there every evening. And each time the near miss resolves into the familiar distance. He is back behind the bar. The connection did not hold. There is a tenderness in Mo that the show deliberately conceals under layers of gruffness, social failure, and the occasional flash of genuine cruelty. He cares about his regulars in a way he cannot quite express Homer in particular, in the specific way that bartenders sometimes come to know their regulars more clearly than the regulars know themselves. He has seen Homer at his best and worst across decades and still opens the door every evening. That is a kind of loyalty. His origin is hinted at across various episodes: a boxing past, a history of failure and other kinds of ambition, a family background that the show touches without dwelling on. He is a person who had a beginning that led here, and here is where he stayed, and the staying has not been kind to him. Mo is Springfield's most visible portrait of a certain kind of masculine unhappiness, the man who carries his misery without acknowledging it, who has learned to present it as character rather than wound, who would rather be seen as rough than vulnerable because vulnerability in Springfield, as everywhere, is expensive. Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson are Homer's closest friends at the plant, his companions in the daily texture of the working day. They are in many ways the most underdeveloped major characters in the show's run, present in nearly every episode, reliably funny in their function, but rarely given the kind of deep-dive treatment that the main family and even some secondary characters receive. What the show has established about them piecemeal across 36 years is quietly interesting. Lenny's eye is a recurring source of peril. Across dozens of episodes, objects and substances approach Lenny's eye with alarming regularity, and the show has built this into a genuine character thread. Lenny's eye as a narrative vulnerability, a running indicator of the physical costs of life in Springfield's industrial environment. One reads this through the radiation theory, and the connection is obvious. Lenny's eye is what the plant does to people. It is the cost made visible. Carl is one of the very few black characters in Springfield who has been given substantial treatment and a perspective that goes beyond function. He is smart, notably, specifically smart, with a level of education and sophistication that the show has flagged multiple times, often in contrast to the assumptions other characters make about him. He has a graduate degree. He has traveled. He has a life that extends well beyond the bar stool and the plant floor. Why is Carl in Springfield? The show has visited this question without fully answering it. He is there because the plant hired him, presumably. He is there because his friendship with Homer and Lenny has roots in the working day. But the show has occasionally suggested that Carl is someone who could have been anywhere and chose or ended up here, and that the relationship between his potential and his location is one of the show's quiet, understated ironies. Chief Clancy Wiggum is Springfield's police force in its most distilled form, not a corrupt institution, but an incompetent one, which the show treats as almost worse. Wiggum is not malicious. He does not take bribes or plant evidence with deliberate intent. He simply does not do the job. He is inattentive, unfit, easily distracted, constitutionally disinclined toward the actual work of law enforcement. He loves his son Ralph with a warmth that is one of the show's most genuinely sweet ongoing relationships, and he provides for his family in the broad strokes, and he attends the social functions that his job requires. But he does not solve crimes. He does not protect the community. He does not investigate the three-eyed fish or the human skeletons in the power plant basement or any of the dozens of things that should, in a functional community, trigger official inquiry. He is the institutional version of Springfield's collective shrug, the person whose job is to look and who looks without seeing. Ralph Wiggum, his son, is one of the show's most interesting characters, a child whose disconnection from ordinary reality is played as comedy but that sits in a slightly different light, as something more complex. Ralph says things that are not wrong, exactly, but that are not connected to the conversation they are theoretically part of. He operates in his own narrative, following its logic with perfect internal consistency, producing statements that are surreal in context but earnest in intention. There is a theory, gentle, unprovable, somewhat touching, that Ralph is deeply perceptive, that his apparent disconnection is actually a form of oblique perception, that he sees things straight on that other people can only approach sideways, and that his statements, strange as they seem, contain the kind of truth that only becomes visible when you stop trying to be normal. Under this reading, Ralph is Springfield's oracle, the person who says the true thing that nobody else can quite say, in language that obscures its accuracy enough to avoid the social consequences of clarity. This may be generous. It may also be exactly right. Groundskeeper Willie is a man who has been maintaining the grounds of Springfield Elementary through conditions that would have forced a lesser person to resign decades ago. He maintains these grounds with an intensity that borders on the devotional, and his relationship to the school is the deepest and most sustained attachment in a life that has otherwise been defined by loss and displacement. He is Scottish, emphatically Scottish, in a way the show has occasionally weaponized for comedy without entirely respecting. But underneath the comedy, the show has given Willie a genuine and specific portrait of someone who found belonging in an unlikely place and has held on to it through sheer willpower. He lives in a shack. He has apparently lost most of the things people typically have a home in any conventional sense. Family connections that he can access, financial security. What he has is the school, the grounds, the relationship with the physical space he tends. This is his. This is what he built in Springfield. And the fragility of it, the fact that it depends on his employment, on the continued operation of the school, on the goodwill of people who frequently overlook him, makes the holding of it both precarious and quietly fierce. Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon ran the quick E-Mart for the show's entire original run, and his character accumulated a richness across those years that went considerably beyond his initial function as a convenience store proprietor. The show built in his Indian heritage, his professional pride in a job the culture around him treats as menial, his arranged marriage and the complex life that followed it, his genuine intelligence and his occasional frustration at the gap between his capability and his circumstances. The conversation about Apu's character and its implications has been part of the show's recent history in ways worth acknowledging honestly. The critique that the character relied on caricature, that the accent and some of the characterization did damage that outlasted any particular comedic intention, is a serious one, and the show's response to it has been uncertain. The question of how to honor the genuine warmth and complexity the character accumulated over decades while acknowledging the legitimate concerns about how he was initially constructed is one the show has not fully resolved. What the character at his best represented was something important. A person of immigrant background who had built a life in an unwelcoming place through extraordinary work and genuine character, who had stayed in a town that did not always see him clearly because the connections he had built there were real. Whose family life, his wife Manjula and their octuplets, his extended community, represented a kind of depth that the convenience store setting was never designed to contain. Apu's story is Springfield's immigrant story. The person who came from somewhere else and stayed because leaving would mean abandoning what was built, who found love and created family inside the circumstances. Who does not fit the town's assumptions about who belongs and continues to belong anyway. Barney Gumble is Homer's oldest friend and the show's most sustained portrait of alcoholism. He was, before alcohol, someone with genuine promise. The show has established this directly. Barney had the intelligence, the potential, the raw material of a different life. The drinking began in a moment of social pressure, in circumstances that the show depicts with more specificity than it needs to in order to make the comedy work, which tells you something about how seriously it takes the portrait. The portrait is taken seriously. Not the pathetic comedy of the town drunk, not the cartoon stumbling of a background joke, but the actual texture of a life consumed by addiction. The way Barney's world has contracted to the space of the bar stool, the way his capability occasionally surfaces, shocking everyone who has forgotten it was there, and then retreats back into the fog, the way he is Homer's friend with a loyalty that addiction has not entirely eliminated, that something underneath the drinking has maintained. His sobriety episodes are the most moving things the show has done with him, the glimpses of who Barney is when the substance is not in the way. He is funny, warm, curious, genuinely bright, in a way that the years of drinking have not entirely erased. The person who could have been is still there, still reachable, still occasionally surfacing before the drinking pulls him back under. Springfield's school faculty deserves its own conversation. The school is the place where the next generation of Springfield is being shaped or not shaped, depending on your assessment of the facility's educational effectiveness, which the show consistently rates as somewhere between minimal and catastrophic. Misses. Crabapple held Springfield Elementary's fourth grade together through decades of declining resources, difficult students, administrative dysfunction, and the particular challenge of Bart Simpson appearing in her classroom every morning. She was not a saint. She was a person who had arrived at teaching with genuine commitment and had been ground down by circumstances into something more world-weary than idealistic. The commitment was still there, underneath the exhaustion, but it had gotten very quiet. What the show gave her, across her run, was specificity. She had a romantic history. She had desires and disappointments and a private life that the classroom did not contain. She was not just a teacher, she was a person who happened to teach, who had organized her survival around the professional identity because other parts of her life had not gone as planned. Her relationship with Bart was the show's most sustained teacher-student dynamic, which is to say it was complicated and real and sometimes transcended both of them. There were moments where she gave him something no one else in his institutional life was willing to give. Not softness, exactly. Recognition. The specific recognition of someone who is difficult as a person rather than as a problem. She saw Bart. She did not always like what she saw, but she saw it. And then she was gone. And the show wrote her a real farewell. Her name on the blackboard? Alone. No punchline. Springfield is full of these people. Full of characters who could fill their own shows if the spotlight had found them, who carry histories and losses and longings that the comedy regularly passes over on its way to the next joke, but that are always there, in the background, in the texture of the place. The show built a world. Over 36 years, it built a world with population density, with backstory, with the particular kind of depth that comes from a writing staff returning to the same place episode after episode and finding new corners to illuminate. Springfield is not just the Simpsons backdrop. It is a community. It breathes. It grieves, it forgets. It votes to maintain the lies that keep it functional and exiles the truths that would require it to change. And in every background shot, in every crowd scene, in every establishing shot of the town going about its business under the shadow of those cracked cooling towers, there are hundreds of people leading their full, unseen lives. The show has given us glimpses of enough of them to understand that every face has a story. That is a remarkable thing to have built. Section 12. The Springfield Collective. What the town itself reveals. It is very late now, or very early. Let yourself drift a little further. The voice will keep going as long as you need it. We have spent all this time with individual people, with Homer and Marge and the children, with Burns and Ned and Smithers and Mona and Skinner, and all the people who make Springfield what it is. We have followed the threads of individual lives, found the secrets underneath the performances, sat with the sadness and the love and the extraordinary, resilient warmth that persists inside the contamination zone, but there is something worth sitting with now that is larger than any individual character, something that belongs to the town itself. Springfield is not just a setting, it is a character. It is the character, some arguments would suggest, that all the others are components of, and Springfield has a secret of its own. We have talked about the radiation theory, the idea that the nuclear plant has been mutating the population, altering biology and cognition, explaining the yellow skin and the four fingers and the survival of injuries that should be fatal. We have talked about the coma theory, the idea that Homer has been dreaming since 1993 and all of Springfield is a product of an unconscious mind's last act of love. We have talked about the collective denial, the principle, and the pauper's diagnosis that the town's amnesia is a feature rather than a bug, a collective choice rather than an accident. Let us spend this final section pulling all of these threads together. Not to resolve them, the show is never going to resolve them, and that is correct, and we should honor that, but to see what the pattern looks like when you hold it up to the light. Springfield exists in a feedback loop with itself. The contamination produces the compliance. The compliance maintains the contamination. The denial enables the system. The system rewards the denial. Burns stays powerful because the population is too cognitively impaired to challenge him, and the population is cognitively impaired because Burns's plant has been poisoning the water supply for decades, and the water supply keeps being poisoned because nobody is in a position to challenge Burns. This is not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It is a system. Systems do not require orchestration. They require alignment of incentives. And Springfield's incentives have been aligned since before anyone currently living in the town was born. The town was built around the plant. The plant's existence predates the residential development around it, predates the Simpsons, predates the current generation of Springfield residents, who are too young to remember a time before. The contamination did not arrive after the community was established. In some sense, the contamination is what established the community. The plant came first, the town grew in its shadow. This matters because it means the people of Springfield did not choose to live next to a dangerous industrial facility. They were born into it. They inherited it. The circumstances of their birth determined their exposure, and their exposure determined their cognitive environment, and their cognitive environment determined their capacity to assess the situation. They cannot evaluate the thing that shaped the evaluator. This is why the collective denial is not quite the same as cowardice, not quite the same as complicity, not quite the same as stupidity. It is something more specific and more sad. It is the limited awareness of a population that has been operating inside a system designed to limit their awareness, without ever having had the opportunity to assess the system from outside it. Lisa is the exception. She always has been. She sees from outside the system because her intelligence amplified, rather than suppressed by whatever the contamination does to different people differently, gives her a viewpoint that the system cannot quite reach. She sees the three-eyed fish and asks the obvious question. She follows the thread from the fish to the water to the plant to Burns, and she articulates the connection clearly in words to anyone who will listen. Nobody listens because nobody can, not fully, not with the sustained clarity the situation requires. They hear Lisa and they process her words through brains that have been living inside the system for their entire existence. And the processing goes soft, goes vague, slides back into the comfortable fog that the system maintains. And Lisa goes back to the drawing board, goes back to the saxophone, goes back to trying to say the thing that cannot be heard. The geography of Springfield is part of this. We talked about it earlier, the impossibility of pinning the town to a state, to a region, to a location on an actual map. Springfield exists everywhere and nowhere. It cannot be found. And a town that cannot be found cannot be regulated, cannot be held to account by the mechanisms that regulate other towns in other states, cannot be investigated by a specific EPA office or a specific state attorney general or a specific federal agency with jurisdiction over a defined territory. Springfield floats between jurisdictions, the way radioactive particles float between cells, touching everything, being contained by nothing, doing its work in the spaces where oversight cannot quite reach. This is, under the more conspiratorial reading, a design feature. Burns has been in a position for decades to influence the very process by which Springfield's geographic identity is established or obscured. A man with enough money and enough connections and enough patience can ensure that the paperwork is always slightly wrong, always slightly contradictory, always producing enough ambiguity to prevent clean regulatory action. Whether or not you accept that level of intentional manipulation, the effect is real. Springfield is effectively ungovernable by any authority outside itself, and its internal governance, the mayor, the police, the school board, is so thoroughly captured by the interests that benefit from the status quo that it functions as maintenance rather than oversight. The mayor takes Burns's calls. The police chief looks the other way because looking costs more than he can afford. The school serves the community badly enough to ensure that the community's next generation will be as poorly equipped to question the system as the current generation is. The medical establishment we discussed, the crayon in Homer's brain, the doctors who missed it across decades of checkups, treats what presents rather than investigating causes. Every institution reinforces the others. Every failure enables the next failure. The town maintains itself in dysfunction the way a healthy system maintains itself in function, through the constant small acts of each component doing exactly what it is designed to do. And what is this town designed to do? To keep Burns alive and powerful, to maintain the plant, to ensure the electricity flows and the paychecks are cut and the population stays just functional enough to do the work and just impaired enough to not do anything about the conditions. That is Springfield. Not a quirky animated town where funny things happen to a lovable family. A containment system. A closed loop. A machine built by one very old, very powerful man to sustain his own existence indefinitely at the cost of everyone inside it. This is the darkest reading, but the show has been pointing toward it for 36 years. The counter reading is warmer and also true. Springfield is a community where real love exists, where the bonds between people are real and enduring, where the Simpson family has built something worth having despite everything the system has thrown at them, where Ned forgives because something in him is genuinely better than what happened to him, where Marge maintains the warmth that holds the family together in a contaminated fog, where Homer runs across the frame every week and lands on the couch with his family. Both readings can be true simultaneously. The machine is real. The love inside the machine is also real. The contamination is real. The warmth that persists inside the contamination is also real. Burns is the architect of something that should not be livable. The Simpsons have been making it livable for 36 years. There is a sequence of images that the show returns to again and again, across seasons and decades, that accumulates meaning with repetition. The house on Evergreen Terrace, the kitchen in the morning, the kitchen table where the family gathers, imperfectly, noisily, chaotically, with food that Homer has probably burned and homework that Bart has definitely not done, and a saxophone somewhere making itself heard. The couch in the living room where the same family assembles in different configurations for the same television. The yellow light of the house at night, visible from the street, suggesting habitation and warmth. These images are the show's thesis, returned to over and over without announcement. This is what persists. This is what endures inside the system. The specific ordinary warmth of a family that did not choose its circumstances and chooses each other anyway. The loop that traps Springfield is also the thing that preserves it. The inability to age, to change, to grow is also the ability to stay. Homer cannot become someone else. He cannot drift away, cannot grow past the family, cannot enter a future in which they are not his whole world. The loop locks him in. The loop keeps him theirs. In the coma reading, the loop is Homer's mind refusing to release the family. In the radiation reading, the loop is the contamination preventing the cellular aging that would otherwise move everyone forward. In the collective denial reading, the loop is Springfield's ongoing vote to maintain the world as it is. In all of these readings, the effect is the same. The family stays together. Springfield persists. There is something almost liturgical about the way the show returns to its own beginning. The theme music, the title card, the family running from different directions and landing on the couch. After 36 years, this opening sequence carries the weight of everything that has come before it. Every episode, every story, every secret we have spent this night exploring. All of it compressed into a few seconds of familiar music and yellow faces, and the specific landing of one family on one couch. They are still there. After everything, they are still there. The loop will not break. Burns will not die. The plant will not close. The fish will continue to have 3 eyes. Bart will continue to be 10. Lisa will continue to be 8 and brilliant and lonely. Maggie will continue to watch everything from behind the pacifier, patient as something that has decided to wait for the right moment. And Homer will continue to fail at his job and succeed at his family, stumbling through every disaster the town can generate, finding his way home at the end of each episode to the couch and the people who live on it, landing there with the particular relief of a man who knows Somewhere below conscious thought, that home was never guaranteed and is therefore always a gift. That is the secret of Springfield. Not the radiation, not the coma, not the denial or the billionaire or the impossibility of the geography. Those are the mechanisms. The secret is what persists through all of them. The house is still lit. The family is still there. After 36 years of everything that town can do to them, they are still on that couch together. So, settle further in now. Let the last of the tension go from your shoulders, your jaw, the back of your neck. You have been carrying the day long enough. Set it down. Springfield is still out there, in the permanent present, in the floating timeline, in the dream or the contamination, or the collective vote to keep things as they are. Homer is probably asleep at his workstation. Marge is probably in the kitchen, hearing something she cannot identify and deciding it can wait until morning. Bart is probably plotting something that will not occur to him until he is already in trouble. Lisa is probably playing the saxophone very quietly, the way you play when you are not playing for anyone, just playing for the sound of it, the way it fills the room and makes the room feel less empty. And Maggie is watching. She is always watching. Everything is fine. Nothing is fine. The loop continues. You can sleep now. I-O-O-O. I-O-O-O. And I-O-O-O. Extended section. Homer and Burns, the hidden axis of Springfield. If you are still here, that is wonderful. Stay as long as you need. The voice will keep going. There is one more relationship in Springfield that deserves extended attention because it is the one that the show has been building across its entire run, without quite naming it as the central axis around which everything else rotates. The relationship between Homer Simpson and Charles Montgomery Burns. These two men are bound together in ways that exceed employment. The show established this gradually and then made it explicit across several key episodes, revealing layer after layer of connection until the picture that emerged was less employer and employee and more something like destiny, two people whose lives have been woven together by circumstances that preceded both of them and that neither of them fully understands. Begin with the surface. Homer works for Burns. This is the daily reality of Homer's working life, the fluorescent lights, the reactor core, the coffee that is never quite right, the occasional meltdown warning that Homer may or may not notice in time. This is the ordinary texture of their connection, the man who signs the check, the man who cashes it. Now go deeper. Burns's plant poisoned the water that Homer has been drinking his entire life. The plant's contamination shaped Homer's development, reduced his cognitive capacity, contributed to the specific disabilities that make Homer the person he is. Burns did not design this outcome. It was not an intentional targeting of Homer personally, but the causal chain is real. The plant's leaking radiation entered Homer's environment. Homer's environment shaped Homer's brain. Homer's brain produced Homer. Burns is, in this sense, one of the authors of Homer Simpson. Now go deeper still. Mona Simpson destroyed Burns's biological weapons lab when Homer was a small child. Burns responded by turning her into a fugitive, by driving her out of Homer's life, by ensuring that Homer would grow up without his mother and therefore with the specific emotional wounds that motherless children carry. The abandonment anxiety, the desperate need for love, the willingness to endure mistreatment in order to preserve the stability of the people he has. All of this traces back to the night Mona kissed him while he slept and disappeared. Burns is the reason Homer grew up alone. Burns is, in this sense, the author of Homer's emotional landscape. And then go deeper. Grandpa Simpson made a deal. Burns knew something compromising about the Simpsons, or the Simpsons knew something compromising about Burns, and in the arrangement that followed, Homer's employment at the plant was guaranteed in exchange for silence. Homer was, without his knowledge, incorporated into a deal between his father and the man who had already destroyed his family once. Burns is Homer's employer because of a deal that Burns's own earlier cruelty made necessary. The arrangement that keeps Homer at the plant is the consequence of the event that drove Mona away. The same action that wounded Homer produced the agreement that binds him. Homer works for the man who made him who he is, who removed his mother, who poisoned his brain, who guaranteed his employment through a deal that Homer was never meant to know about. And Homer, because of everything the system has done to his ability to connect these dots, cannot see it. This is the architecture of Springfield in miniature. The system maintains itself by ensuring that the people most harmed by it lack the cognitive tools to trace the harm back to its source. Burns poisons the water. The water impairs the thinking. The impaired thinking prevents the investigation. The absence of investigation allows the plant to keep poisoning the water. Homer is the living proof of this circuit. But Homer is also something else. Homer is the proof that the circuit is not complete, that something survives inside it that the circuit was not designed to accommodate. Homer cannot see the architecture of his own suffering, but he can feel the love he has built despite it. He can find the couch at the end of every episode. He can run across the frame and land next to his family. The system wanted a broken man. It got one. But it also got a man capable of love that the system cannot metabolize, cannot redirect, cannot use as a mechanism of control. Homer's love for Marge, for his children, for the specific warmth of the house on Evergreen Terrace, this love exists outside the system's design. It was not planned for. It cannot be leveraged. Burns cannot touch it. And this love, improbable and unkillable, and constantly renewed by the weekly loop of the show's structure, is the thing that outlasts the system. Burns will eventually not wake up from a treatment. The plant will eventually close or be shut down or be abandoned when the money and the doctors and the carefully maintained balance of diseases finally tips. The empire will end. Everything ends. But the couch will still be there, and the family will still be on it. That is not a small thing. In a world maintained by Burns's money and Burns's cruelty and Burns's century-long grip on the town's economy and environment and political apparatus, the love that Homer stumbled into or that Marge built for him is the one thing that has not been his to control, and it will outlast him. Equals OOOOFO. Extended section. The children and their futures. What Springfield built. Very slow breathing now. You can let the words become texture, become sound, become the steady company of a voice in the dark. The children of Springfield are the generation that the system built in full knowledge of what it was building, and what it built is extraordinary. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie Simpson were born into circumstances that should, by every reasonable measure, have produced 3 cognitively and emotionally damaged children. They grew up in a contaminated environment, in a household run by a man of limited cognitive capacity, in a town that cannot remember its own history, in the shadow of an employer whose agenda required their father's continued impairment. What the system did not account for is Marge. Marge's presence in that household is the variable the system failed to model. Burns's arrangement depended on Homer being broken and compliant, and Homer is both of those things in his professional life. But Homer's domestic life was Marge's project. And Marge built something inside the contamination zone that the contamination could not fully reach. She built 3 children who, each in their own way, are more than the system intended. Bart is more than a failure. Underneath the performance of failure is a person of genuine capability, genuine loyalty, genuine warmth, who has been waiting for circumstances that make those qualities available. He is not the sum of his disciplinary record. He is not the worst thing he has done. The system would prefer him to be both of those things: a cautionary tale, a drain, a person who generates costs without producing value. He refuses this. Not heroically, not consciously, but with the stubborn persistence of someone who has not yet given up on himself even when everyone else has. Lisa is more than a disappointment. Springfield consistently disappoints her, gives her back a diminished version of every cause she champions, a town that cannot be improved by the effort she brings to improving it. The system benefits from her disappointment. A disappointed person is easier to manage than an energized one. But Lisa keeps coming back. The disappointment does not stick. The idealism reasserts itself because it is structural, because it is who she is at the level below conscious choice. She cannot stop believing that things can be better than they are. In a town that has made collective peace with worse, that belief is dangerous, which is why the system works so hard, implicitly, to isolate her and dismiss her, and why she remains, after everything, the best chance Springfield has. Maggie is more than silent. We have said this. She is the variable the system has not yet encountered. She is the result of the contamination that none of the contamination's intended effects could have predicted. She is the supercharged intelligence in the body of a baby watching the full architecture of Springfield's dysfunction from a position of apparent helplessness that she has cultivated so carefully that not even the people closest to her can see past it. She knows what is happening. She may be the only person in Springfield, outside of Burns himself, who sees the full picture, who has traced every connection, who understands the loop. The question the show has been slowly building toward across 36 years of her enormous watching eyes is what she will do with that understanding. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for as long as the show has existed. She will be 1 year old for as long as the show continues. The loop will hold her there, permanent and unchanging, with the knowledge and the watching and the planning. Unless the loop breaks, the show will never tell us if the loop breaks. It will never confirm the coma theory or the radiation theory or the collective denial theory. It will never show us an older Bart or a grown Lisa or a speaking Maggie. It will never reveal Burns' final treatment or Homer's final shift or the day Marge puts down the rubber gloves and looks at her hands and decides she has held everything together long enough. It will not show us the end. The loop prevents it. We prevent it with our watching, with our returning, with our need for the family to stay there on the couch where we left them. And so they stay. Bart stays 10, Lisa stays 8, Maggie stays 1, Homer stays somewhere in his mid-30s. Marge keeps her hair improbable and her patience intact. Burns keeps his treatments. Smithers keeps the schedule. Ned keeps forgiving. Moe keeps opening the bar. The fish keeps its 3 eyes. The plant keeps its 342 violations. The loop continues. We made it. We maintain it. We tune in every week to make sure it is still there. And every time we do, Springfield is still there. The house is still lit. The family is still assembled. The couch is still occupied. And Homer is still running toward them. He always runs toward them. That is the secret of every character in Springfield. Under all the theory, all the mystery, all the darkness and the radiation and the corruption and the denial, all of it, every last buried thread we have followed tonight, the secret is this. They are running toward each other. Every single one of them, in their own way, by their own route, is running toward the thing they love. Homer toward Marge. Marge toward the family she built. Bart toward the recognition he deserves. Lisa toward the world she believes in. Maggie toward the moment she has been preparing for. Smithers toward Burns. Ned toward God. Mona toward the son she lost. Skinner toward the identity he built. Even Burns, in his cold and controlled and medically sustained way, toward the next week, the next treatment, the continued fact of his own existence. They are all running toward something. The loop preserves the running. It never shows us the landing. But in Homer's case, at least, we know the landing. It is the couch. It is always the couch, and his family is on it. Rest now. Whatever you came here carrying, you can set it down for the night. Springfield will be there when you wake up. The fish with 3 eyes, the plant with its cracked towers, the family with their yellow faces and their 4 fingers, and their impossible resilience. Homer will be sleeping at his workstation, dreaming of donuts or of his children, or dreaming the whole of Springfield itself into continued existence. Marge will be at the sink or asleep beside him, holding everything together even in sleep. Bart will be planning something. Lisa will be playing something, very quietly, for herself. Maggie will be watching. The loop will hold. You can sleep. Everything you love is still there. Thank you for spending this night in Springfield. Extended Addendum. The secondary worlds within Springfield. For those still awake, or those who have drifted and returned, here is a little more. Springfield contains worlds within worlds. The show has, across its run, built out institutions and communities inside the larger community that each carry their own interior logic, their own tensions, their own buried stories. The church is one of these worlds. Reverend Lovejoy runs Springfield's First Church of Springfield with the energy of a man who has been doing the same job for too long and has made peace with doing it at less than his best. He was not always this way. The show has implied a younger Lovejoy who brought genuine passion to his vocation, who believed in the specific capacity of religious community to do real good in the lives of real people. What happened to that person is, in some episodes, attributed to Ned Flanders. Ned's relentless religious inquiries, his constant need for pastoral guidance on questions of faith and behavior, his bottomless appetite for theological discussion at all hours, these wore Lovejoy down. The show plays this as a joke about Ned's excessive devotion, but underneath the joke is something real about the human cost of being the person others lean on for meaning. Every counselor, every pastor, every person whose role is to hold others' spiritual weight eventually has to put the weight down. Lovejoy put it down by stopping to feel it. He goes through the motions. He delivers the sermons. He maintains the institution. He has essentially stopped having a personal relationship with the faith that underpins the institution, the way you can maintain a garden without ever stopping to enjoy being in it. His wife, Helen, is a character the show has used primarily as the town's moral enforcer, the person who identifies transgressions and ensures the community is aware of them. She is the surveillance layer of Springfield's social control, the network through which information about who has done what wrong travels from person to person with remarkable efficiency. The show treats her as a busybody, as a comic figure of small-town judgment. But Helen Lovejoy is also a person who lives in a house with a man who stopped caring about the thing that was supposed to organize their life together. She has found, in community enforcement, a substitute for the meaning that was supposed to come from the marriage. The judgment is displacement. The surveillance is engagement. She is looking for the same thing everyone in Springfield is looking for, a sense that the world has order, that behavior has consequences, that the system is responsive to the things she cares about. The school is another of these worlds. Springfield Elementary is chronically underfunded, chronically understaffed, operating on facilities that the show has depicted at various points as structurally unsound, physically dangerous, and educationally inadequate. It has asbestos. It has a perpetually leaking roof. It has classrooms that are too large and textbooks that are too old and teachers who are too tired. The school is also the place where the next generation of Springfield is being formed. This makes it, in the logic of the larger Springfield system, important to maintain in exactly its current state of inadequate function. Functional schools produce functional graduates. Functional graduates ask more questions. The system does not benefit from more questions. The budget crises that regularly afflict the school are not accidental. They are the predictable result of a town whose primary employer has spent decades arranging to pay as little tax as possible, whose property values are suppressed by the contamination that same employer's facility produces, whose residents lack the cognitive and political resources to mount effective advocacy for their own institutions. Bart is a product of that school, so is Lisa. The difference in their outcomes, and the difference is significant, even accounting for the ways Bart's potential has been suppressed and Lisa's has been limited by isolation, reflects as much the resources they arrived with as the resources the school provided. Lisa would flourish in almost any environment. Bart might have flourished in a different one. In Springfield Elementary, he learned that the institution is not designed for him. He was not wrong. The town hall is a third world within the world. Mayor Quimby, a figure modeled with sufficient looseness on a certain famous political family that the show has maintained deniability across decades, runs Springfield's municipal government with the practiced ease of a man who has never been meaningfully challenged for his position and does not expect to be. His corruption is the comfortable, embedded kind, not the urgent, grasping corruption of someone who fears exposure, but the settled corruption of someone who has been in power long enough to confuse his own benefit with the public interest. He is not malicious. He is not particularly smart. He is the local manifestation of a principle that the show has been satirizing since its inception. That power, left unchecked for long enough, stops being about anything other than its own continuation. Quimby does not govern Springfield in the interest of Springfield's residents. He governs it in the interest of continued governing. The distinction, from his position, has become invisible. He and Burns have an understanding. The show has never made this explicit in the way it would need to be to constitute a canonical conspiracy, but it has implied it clearly enough that the implication does the work. Burns is the largest employer, the largest taxpayer, the largest single contributor to the economic activity that makes Quimby's Springfield viable. Their interests align. Burns does not need to corrupt Quimby actively. The alignment of interests is sufficient. Quimby knows what Burns needs, and providing it is compatible with everything else he needs anyway. The town square, the site of Springfield's regular civic explosions, the protests and the rallies, and the occasional mobs and the times the town has banded together in genuine common purpose, however briefly, is the show's most consistent site of community formation. Whatever else Springfield fails at, it produces community. The residents gather, they argue, They form opinions with passionate intensity on small matters and suspicious serenity on large ones, but they are there, together, in the public space of the town they share. This is not nothing. In a world that has spent decades fragmenting the public sphere, that has moved civic life increasingly into private and mediated spaces, Springfield's persistent, chaotic, somewhat violent commitment to the town square as a site of communal expression is quietly radical. They are wrong about many things. They make terrible collective decisions. They vote to exile truth and maintain fiction. They form mobs over trivialities. They are, in aggregate, cognitively impaired, politically captured, and constitutionally incapable of the sustained organized action that actual structural change would require. But they show up. They gather. They are still, in some fundamental sense, a community. And a community, even a damaged one, even one living inside a contamination zone, even one that has voted to make honesty a crime, is a thing worth something. It is the thing worth saving. The reason Lisa keeps making her arguments, keeps playing her music, keeps refusing to shrug. It is not because she thinks she can dismantle Burns's empire alone or fix the plant's violations through the force of her moral clarity. It is because the community is still there. The people are still there. The possibility of collective awakening is still there, diminished and continuously suppressed, but not extinguished. You cannot fix a community that has disbanded. You cannot awaken a population that has dispersed. Springfield's persistence, its loop, its inability to change these are also its preservation. The people are still here. The town is still here. The story is still being told. Wherever Lisa's arguments fall on deaf ears, they are being heard by Maggie. Wherever Bart's energy goes undirected, it is being watched by someone who might eventually show him a better direction. Wherever Homer stumbles, Marge is there to absorb the stumble and redirect the energy. The system is not working. The people inside it are working, constantly, with what they have. That is enough. It has to be enough. Because this is Springfield, and it is what there is. The plant will keep running. Burns will keep living. The fish will keep swimming with its extra eye. The timeline will keep floating. The loop will keep looping. And in the middle of all of it, on a couch on Evergreen Terrace, a family that should not have survived any of this will gather for another evening together. Still yellow, still warm, still there. Sleep now. Springfield will be there in the morning. It always is. Thank you for spending this time here. If you made it this far, through all of Springfield's secrets and buried stories and impossible, beautiful, heartbreaking, persistent warmth, you are one of us now. One of the people who watched long enough to see past the surface. One of the people who refused to just shrug and move on. Drop a comment if you are still awake. Tell us where you are watching from and what time it is where you are, and whether you see Springfield the same way after tonight. And subscribe if this was worth your time. It helps, and there is so much more to explore. Good night. From Springfield, wherever Springfield is. Good night. Extended section. Abe Simpson, the past that never stops. Still here? Good. Let the blanket settle around you. Let the voice find its rhythm. Abraham Simpson, Abe, Grandpa. The old man is the character the show uses to think about time. Not the floating timeline, not the way Springfield refuses to age, but real time. The weight of it, the accumulation of it. The way a person becomes, through decades of living, a collection of things that happened rather than a person who is still happening. Abe Simpson is in his 80s. Unlike every other resident of Springfield, he has been allowed to be old. The show does not exempt him from aging the way it exempts the Simpsons proper. He is white-haired, frail, given to long digressions about events that his audience has neither the patience nor the context to appreciate. He lives in the Springfield retirement castle, which the show has depicted across its run as a place of varying bleakness, sometimes darkly funny in its institutional indignity, sometimes genuinely sad in ways that the comedy cannot fully cover. He is lonely. The show is honest about this. Homer visits when he remembers to, which is less often than it should be, and less often than Abe would like, though Abe has made a specific peace with this that only becomes visible in the quieter episodes. He has lowered his expectations not out of defeat, but out of the accumulated wisdom of knowing what is available and deciding to want only that. His stories are the show's most consistent source of comedy and its most consistent source of pathos simultaneously. The comedy is obvious, the old man who cannot get to the point, who digresses endlessly, who loses the thread and circles back to things nobody was waiting for, who tells the story about the time he caught a fish that requires 11 minutes and 3 wrong turns to arrive at a punchline nobody finds funny. The pathos is quieter but persistent. Abe's stories are the only thing he has that the world cannot take from him. They are his history, his evidence, his proof that he was here and things happened to him and he was present in the world, and it mattered. Nobody listens to his stories. They never have. Homer has been not listening to his father's stories for his entire life. With a consistency that functions as its own kind of tribute, at least Homer is reliably present in his absence. At least the not listening is familiar rather than new. At least Abe knows what to expect. This is the specific grief of old age that the show renders most honestly. Not the physical diminishment, not the loss of health and mobility and independence. The loss of audience. The arrival at a point in life where the things that happen to you are no longer interesting to anyone because anyone who shared the context is gone, and the people who remain are focused on their own present in ways that leave no room for your past. Abe's past was significant. The show has established this across decades. He served in the Second World War, with a unit that included various combinations of characters who would become Springfield residents, in ways that the show has played with and contradicted depending on the episode's needs, but that collectively suggest a man who was genuinely present for one of history's defining events. He has told stories about the war that are obviously embellished, obviously shaped by the years of retelling, obviously missing the parts that were too heavy to carry into old age. But something happened to him. Something real. He was there. He was young once. And the show has shown us this in flashback, a younger Abe who had a fire in him, who made choices with confidence, who was not yet the man that time and loss and the specific erosions of his particular life would make him. He had a wife. He lost her, or she left, or she was taken, depending on which version of the story the floating timeline is currently maintaining. He raised a son alone, in the specific way of men of his generation, who were not given the vocabulary for the emotional work and who did it anyway with the tools they had. He did not do it well. Homer's emotional wounds are, in significant part, Abe's work. The cold distance that Homer internalized as a template for how fathers relate to sons, even as he has tried, consciously, to be different from. It came from Abe's inability to bridge the gap between what he felt and what he could express. He loved Homer. He just could not show it in ways that Homer could receive. And now Abe sits in the retirement castle with his stories and his memories and the specific indignity of institutional care, and he waits for Homer to visit. And Homer visits less often than he should, and the circle of the relationship continues with the same painful structure. It always had love present, expression inadequate, distance maintained by the failure to close it. The most devastating thing the show has ever done with Abe is also one of its quietest moments. There is an episode where Homer and Abe are thrown together, and the conversation turns to the things that were never said between them, to the gap that has always been there, and in the space of one episode, something like genuine communication occurs. Something like the connection that should have been built over decades and wasn't is briefly available. And then the episode ends, and the next episode begins. And the reset is in place, and the gap is back, and Homer and Abe are in the positions they have always occupied. This is the most honest thing the show does about intergenerational relationship. The gap does not close because of one good conversation. The wound does not heal because of one episode of clarity. The work of a lifetime of emotional unavailability cannot be undone in 22 minutes. The reset is not cartoon laziness. The reset is truth. Abe told Homer his mother was dead because he could not tell him the truth. The truth would require explaining himself, explaining the deal with Burns, explaining the choices he made and the compromises he accepted, and the ways his silence contributed to the shape of Homer's life. The lie was simpler. Grief, at least, has a direction. The truth would have produced questions Abe could not answer. He chose his own comfort over his son's reality, and then lived with the choice for decades, watching Homer become the person the lie produced rather than the person the truth might have allowed. Abe Simpson is not a villain. He is a man who was given tools insufficient to the job and who used the tools he had and who produced, despite this, a son who loves his family, who tries every day, who keeps running toward the couch. Whatever Abe failed to give Homer, something made it through. Something found a way. He is an old man in a retirement home. telling stories nobody listens to, waiting for a visit that comes too rarely. He is also the beginning of everything. Every story in Springfield runs through him. Extended section, Chief Wiggum and the law that does not apply. There is something specifically revealing about Springfield's relationship with law enforcement, and Chief Clancy Wiggum is its most complete expression. Law enforcement, in its ideal form, is the mechanism through which a community holds itself accountable, through which the behaviors that harm the community are identified, addressed, and prevented from repeating. It is, at its best, the community's commitment to itself, the collective decision that certain things are not acceptable, and the institutional means of maintaining that decision. In Springfield, this function does not operate. It does not operate not because Wiggum is actively corrupt. The show distinguishes between corruption and incompetence, and Wiggum is primarily the latter. He does not take specific bribes from specific people to ignore specific crimes in the organized way that constitutes corruption in its classical sense. He simply does not do the work. He does not investigate. He does not follow leads. He does not attend to the mountain of evidence that surrounds the most obvious ongoing crime in Springfield's history, the nuclear plant's continuous violation of every safety standard in existence and the documented harm this causes to the surrounding community. He has encountered evidence of Burns's wrongdoing dozens of times in canonical episodes and has consistently failed to act on it. Not because he is instructed not to, but because acting would require sustained attention and effort that he does not apply to his job. This is arguably worse than corruption. Corruption, at least, has a logic. Someone is being paid. Someone is making a calculation that the benefit of inaction outweighs the risk of accountability. Wiggum's inaction is not calculated. It is constitutional. He is not choosing to look the other way. He is simply not looking. His relationship with his son Ralph is the show's most sustained engagement with the possibility of a different Wiggum. With Ralph, Wiggum is present in ways he is not professionally. He loves Ralph with an unguarded completeness that his working life does not suggest he possesses. He celebrates Ralph's achievements, however idiosyncratic. He protects Ralph from consequences in ways that are themselves a form of harm, insulating his son from the educational and social friction that would help Ralph develop but that come from the purest place. Ralph is beloved. Genuinely, unequivocally, unconditionally beloved. By a father who cannot be bothered to investigate a billionaire's century of crimes, but who will move the earth to make sure his son feels known and valued, the disconnect is interesting. Wiggum has capacity. He has warmth. He has the ability to care. He just deploys it within a very small radius. Ralph, his wife Sarah, the immediate domestic circle. Beyond that radius, the capability shuts down. The food and the television and the comfortable chair at home are more compelling than the unsolved crimes and the unaddressed injustices of the town he is paid to protect. Springfield's law enforcement is, in this reading, not designed to protect Springfield's residents. It is designed to appear to protect them, while actually protecting the status quo from the kind of disruption that genuine enforcement would create. Wiggum is the perfect instrument of this design, present enough to maintain the appearance, inert enough to never threaten the underlying arrangement. Burns does not need to corrupt Wiggum. He just needs Wiggum to remain Wiggum. Extended section, Dr. Hibbert and the medical establishment. Julius Hibbert is Springfield's most visible physician, and his relationship to his community's medical realities is one of the show's quietest and most sustained indictments of institutional complicity. He is a good doctor in the technical sense. He is competent, well-trained, evidently skilled at the mechanics of medicine. He has diagnosed Homer's numerous and frequently bizarre medical conditions with reasonable accuracy. He has delivered children, treated injuries, performed surgeries. He does the job. He does not, however, do the larger job that his position in the community should require him to do. Consider what Dr. Hibbert knows. He knows the population of Springfield. He knows their medical histories, their patterns of illness, the things that show up in blood work and tissue samples, and the accumulated data of a medical career in a specific place. He knows Homer knows that Homer once had a crayon removed from his brain that had been there since childhood, knows that Homer's cognitive function exists significantly below normal human range, knows the physical history of a man who has survived injuries that should have been fatal. He has treated the residents of Springfield's surrounding neighborhoods for decades. He has seen what decades of proximity to the nuclear plant does to a human body, or he should have the data is there, in the files, in the patterns of illness that a competent epidemiologist looking at his practice would immediately identify as evidence of environmental contamination. He does not say anything about it. His laugh, the distinctive, slightly inappropriate chuckle that punctuates his dialogue in almost every appearance, functions as the show's most specific characterization of this silence. It is the laugh of a man who has trained himself to find the light side of every situation, including situations that have no light side, because finding the light side is the mechanism by which he avoids engaging with the dark side. The laugh is not happiness. It is a tool, a professional adaptation, a way of being in his practice that lets him be useful without being present in the way that full presence would require. The crayon in Homer's brain, the most visible metaphor for what Springfield's medical establishment has failed to do, passed through Hibbert's hands. Or should have. Homer received medical care in Springfield. Homer had checkups, presumably, had the moments of medical contact that adult life requires. And nobody found the crayon. Either the care was catastrophically incompetent, or someone found it and chose not to mention it, or the system simply was not looking for it, because looking would have produced a finding, and a finding would have produced a question, and the question would have pointed toward the plant, and pointing toward the plant would have pointed toward Burns. Doctor. Hibbert's laugh is the medical establishment's version of Springfield's collective shrug. It sounds different. It is the same thing. Extended section, Moe's Tavern as community, the place that holds the pieces. Let the voice carry you a little further. You do not have to track every word. Let it become texture. Moe's Tavern is the third place. Social scientists use this term to describe the spaces that are neither home nor work, the spaces where community forms in its most voluntary and unstructured way, where people who have chosen to be in the same place discover what they share with each other. In Springfield, Moe's Tavern is where Homer goes when the house is too full of itself, too much homework, too much conflict, too many needs pressing against each other in the small domestic space of Evergreen Terrace. It is not that he is escaping his family. He is extending himself into a space where the self is slightly less constrained, where the role of father and husband and safety inspector can relax into the simpler role of man sitting at bar with drink in hand. The regulars at Moe's are the texture of Homer's social world outside the family. Barney. Perpetually present, perpetually compromised, perpetually the reminder of what Homer could have been if different choices had been made at different moments. Lenny and Carl, carrying the weight of their decades of shared working life. Moe himself, whose particular brand of miserable company Homer has apparently found preferable to most alternatives. This is community. Damaged, limited, sustained by alcohol and the low expectations of people who have made peace with their circumstances, but community. The people at Moe's know each other. They show up for each other in the ways they can, which are not large ways but are consistent ones. They are reliable in their presence even when they are unreliable in almost everything else. The bar itself has been destroyed and rebuilt and reconfigured across the show's run. It has burned down, been condemned, been temporarily transformed into other businesses before reverting to its original function. This mirrors Springfield's broader dynamic of catastrophe and restoration. Things are destroyed, and then they are back, without explanation, without ceremony. The bar is gone, and then the bar is there again. What persists is the gathering, the specific group of people who come to this specific place. The social arrangement is more durable than the physical space it occupies. You can burn down Moe's Tavern, but you cannot burn down the fact of Moe's regulars needing somewhere to sit together. Moe understands this. It is when you strip away the comedy and the depression and the elaborate, unsuccessful schemes, the thing Moe has built his life around. He is a keeper of the gathering. The building belongs to him. The gathering belongs to the people who fill it. He is surly about this. He expresses his care through insults and exasperation and the specific manner of a man who wants you to know that he finds your presence a burden while also being in the room early to make sure the bar is open before you arrive. This is a language of love that the show has never called a language of love because it does not fit the shape that love is supposed to take. But look at what Moe does when Homer is in crisis. He does not counsel. He does not offer perspective. He pours the drink and stays behind the bar and is present for however long the crisis requires someone to be present. This is not nothing. In the specific economy of emotional support that Moe's Tavern offers, Moe is the Reliable presence is the whole of the offer, and the reliability of it is genuine. Homer keeps coming back. After 36 years, he keeps coming back. You could argue that this reflects the addiction aspect, the need for alcohol that the show treats with comic distance rather than clinical accuracy. But you could also argue that Homer keeps coming back because Moe is there, because the bar is there, because in a life that is full of uncertainty and falling down and failing at large things, the certainty of this specific place and these specific people is genuinely valuable. The third place matters. The gathering matters. The community of Moe's Tavern, limited and damaged as it is part of what makes Homer capable of going back to Evergreen Terrace and being present for the family. The release of the bar enables the showing up at home. Burns cannot own this. He can own the plant, can own the economy, can own the political and medical infrastructure of the town. He cannot own the third place. He cannot own the gathering. And the gathering persists in the specific American vernacular of the neighborhood bar, season after season, with its cast of broken and lovable and unremarkable people, filling the space and making something real in it. That is what the third place does. It makes community possible for people who could not build it anywhere else. Extended section, The Treehouse of Horror, Springfield Undefended. Once a year, Springfield drops its defenses. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the annual Halloween specials, now numbering well into the 30s, are the show's declared permission to do the things it cannot do in regular episodes. To kill the characters, to destroy the town, to explore the darkness that the regular format keeps at the boundary, to take the horror that is always somewhat present in Springfield's reality and bring it fully to the surface. In these episodes, Homer dies. Frequently, elaborately, with evident creative investment in the manner and the spectacle. The same is true of other characters. The town is invaded, destroyed, reorganized by supernatural forces that the regular Springfield could not accommodate. The monsters come out. The psychological material that the comedy format keeps managed and contained erupts without restraint. And then the episode ends. And the next week, the regular format resumes. Homer is alive. The town is intact. The monsters are gone. But here is the interesting thing about the Treehouse episodes. They do not feel like ruptures. They feel like revelations. The horror that the regular format keeps just below the surface, the horror of the radiation, the horror of Burns's power, the horror of the way the town exists in a loop that prevents it from ever changing finds temporary, legitimate expression in these specials. The monsters are not less real than what they represent. They are more honest about it. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are where Springfield gets to tell the truth about itself through the alibi of fiction. Every year, once a year, the mask comes off. The contamination takes its literal shape as mutation. The power structure reveals itself as actual predation. The town's inability to escape its circumstances is given the shape of supernatural imprisonment. And then the mask goes back on. The comedy resumes. Springfield agrees to forget what it said when the lights went dark. But the audience remembers. The audience carries the Treehouse episodes forward into the regular seasons, and the regular seasons carry traces of them back. The relationship between the two modes of Springfield is more permeable than the format suggests. The horror is always there. The Treehouse just names it. This is the relationship between humor and horror that the show has maintained across its entire run, and it is one of the things that makes The Simpsons genuinely distinctive among long-running television. It is not a comedy that sometimes does dark things. It is a text that runs on two frequencies simultaneously, the frequency of laughter and the frequency of dread, and it has trained its audience to receive both without having to choose between them. The people of Springfield laugh and then they shudder and then they laugh again. This is a skill the show has developed in its audience over decades. The capacity to hold multiple emotional responses at once. The capacity to find something funny and also terrible and also warm and also sad, all in the same moment, without needing any of these responses to cancel the others out. That is the Treehouse's gift. It is also Springfield's truth. Extended section, Patty and Selma. The lives Marge could have had. Drift a little. You do not have to follow every thread tonight. Let some of them float past. Patty and Selma Bouvier are Marge's sisters, and they are two of the show's most interesting mirrors for the question of what Marge's life looks like from certain angles. They are the alternative paths, the roads not taken, the version of the Bouvier woman's life that did not include Homer Simpson. They smoke. continuously, prodigiously, in ways the show has used as both comedy and characterization for its entire run. The cigarettes are, among other things, a signifier of a certain kind of mid-century female survival strategy, the small pleasure maintained against the backdrop of dissatisfaction, the defiant indulgence in the face of circumstances that offer limited alternatives. They were smoking before it was known to be harmful, and they continued after, because quitting would require a kind of self-care that their general orientation toward life does not prioritize. They work at the DMV. They have worked at the DMV for the entirety of the show's run, performing one of society's most dreaded administrative functions, with a combination of competence and barely concealed contempt that has made them among the show's most recognizable recurring figures. The DMV is their kingdom, and within it they are absolute. Outside it, they are women approaching middle age and beyond, who have made peace, or something like peace, with the lives they have. Their relationship with Homer is one of the show's most sustained recurring dynamics. They hate him. Not as a performance of in-law friction, but as a genuine, considered assessment that the man their sister chose is insufficient to the woman she is. This assessment is not entirely wrong. Homer is genuinely insufficient in many of the ways Patty and Selma identify. He is careless with Marge's time and effort, oblivious to her needs in ways that extend across decades, a presence in her life that adds as much weight as it does warmth. What they miss, and the show is careful to show you, this is the warmth. The specific warmth that Homer generates for Marge, the love that is real even when its expression is clumsy, the man underneath the imperfection who genuinely, completely, vulnerably loves their sister in a way that Patty and Selma's various romantic adventures have not produced for them. They have each had romantic lives. The show has given them episodes that treat their desires seriously, Selma's repeated marriages, Patty's eventual coming out, the various configurations of longing and disappointment that constitute their romantic histories. These episodes work because the show takes Patty and Selma seriously as people, not just as comedy devices, not just as the sisters-in-law who hate Homer, as women who want connection, who have their own specific hungers and disappointments, who have organized themselves around the absence of what they wanted and are managing that absence with varying degrees of grace. Patty came out in a later season, in an episode that the show handled with more care than some of its social issue episodes receive. The revelation was not played as a shock or a joke at Patty's expense, but as the surfacing of something true that had been true for a long time, that Patty herself had managed for a long time in the specific way. You manage something you have not yet found a way to speak. The episode was notable for what it suggested about the cost of that management. Decades of finding Homer contemptible without ever quite being able to name the real source of the contempt. Decades of expressing dissatisfaction with Marge's life without being able to say what kind of life she herself wanted. The coming out was personal liberation, but it was also the resolution of a very specific kind of long-held tension. Selma's marriages to Sideshow Bob, to Troy McClure, to others across the series are the show's most sustained comic examination of the gap between what we want and what we settle for. Each marriage arrives with hope and ends with the specific disillusionment of hopes that were never quite grounded in the person in question. Selma wants a family. She wants the warmth of domestic life, the child she keeps trying to adopt, the companion who will be there in the evenings. These wants are real. The men she marries are generally not in a position to satisfy them. The tragedy of Selma, rendered consistently in comedy mode, is the tragedy of wanting something real and looking for it in places that cannot contain it. The marriages are symptoms of the genuine need, not the fulfillment of it. But Selma persists. She keeps trying. This is the thing about both of these women that the show honors through its comedy. They persist. They have not given up on the lives they wanted to have. They are still there, still smoking, still enduring, still occasionally allowing themselves to want things. They are, in their specific way, survivors. The show's comedy would be easier if they were simply comic figures, caricatures of the bitter spinster aunts who resent their sister's domestic life. But they are more than that. They are women who made choices under specific constraints and who live inside those choices with a complicated mixture of acceptance and longing that the comedy cannot quite contain. They are, in this sense, more like Marge than either of them would admit. Extended section. Ralph Wiggum, the Oracle in the Classroom. Let the voice settle into something even slower now, like breathing. Ralph Wiggum is 8 years old, and he exists in a relationship to reality that the show has never fully explained and probably should not explain, because the explanation would resolve a mystery that is more valuable unsolved. He says things that are not connected to the conversation they emerge from, that follow a logic the conversation cannot track, that arrive from somewhere, some interior process, some private understanding of the world that his classmates and teachers cannot access. He is sincere in every statement. He is never performing disconnection. He genuinely means the things he says. My cat's breath smells like cat food. I'm Idaho. When I grow up, I want to be a principal or a caterpillar. These are not nonsense. If you stay with them long enough, and the show rewards staying with them, they have a specific kind of internal coherence. They are the statements of someone who is attending to different things than the people around him, who is organizing his perceptions around different priorities, who is responding to the world as he finds it, rather than as the social contract has agreed it should be experienced. There is a theory, which we mentioned earlier and which deserves its full expansion here, that Ralph is perceiving things accurately and obliquely rather than inaccurately and literally. That when he says, "My cat's breath smells like cat food," he is making an observation that is not stupid but simply specific. He has attended to his cat's breath and noticed a fact about it, and reported that fact, without the social filter that would tell him the observation is not appropriate to the current conversation. This is not stupidity. This is, arguably, a different kind of intelligence, one that processes sensory information richly and reports it faithfully, without the editorial layer that social intelligence applies. Ralph does not have the filter. He says what he perceives. The tragedy of this, in a classroom context, is that the absence of the filter looks like the absence of intelligence to people who rely on the filter. Mrs. Krabappel grades Ralph's papers and finds them bewildering. His classmates find him strange. The system assesses him as deficient. What the system cannot assess is whether Ralph is deficient or simply other, whether the intelligence he has is less than what is required or different in ways that require different instruments. Under the radiation theory, Ralph represents a specific mutation, the radiation affecting the cognitive architecture differently in his case, producing not impairment but divergence. He is not less than neurotypical. He is other than neurotypical. The contamination produced in him something that the contamination did not intend, a consciousness that operates outside the patterns the system is designed to manage. His relationship with Lisa is one of the show's more touching minor threads. Lisa, who is so often isolated by the excess of her intelligence, occasionally finds in Ralph's divergence something she can relate to. They are both outside the social norm, for entirely different reasons. And in that shared outsider position, there is occasionally a recognition between them that their classmates cannot offer. Ralph reaches out to Lisa with a sincerity that her intelligence cannot deflect. She cannot dismiss him as a peer unworthy of her attention, because Ralph is not competing with her for the social status her intelligence is supposed to convey. He is simply there, simply present, simply saying the strange true things that he says, without agenda. And Lisa, who is so often performing her own kind of outsider position, the committed activist, the too smart kid occasionally allows herself to be simply present with him too. These moments are brief. The show does not dwell on them, but they are there. Ralph Wiggum says things that are not wrong. They are just arrived at from somewhere that the map does not cover. Maybe Springfield needs him precisely because of this. Maybe in a town that has organized its entire existence around maintaining a specific version of reality, the person who looks at that version and says, "My cat's breath smells like cat food," is performing a necessary function. Maybe Ralph is the only person in Springfield who is actually seeing things as they are. Extended section, comic book guy, and the weight of expertise. There is a man in Springfield who knows everything about a very specific set of things and almost nothing about the rest of the world. And the show has made him one of its most recurring and productively complicated figures. Comic book guy, his actual name, revealed in a later episode, is Jeff Albertson, which the show presented as a deeply disappointing real-world anchor for a figure who had seemed larger without one runs the android's dungeon and baseball card shop. He is the proprietor of a small, niche business catering to a specific kind of consumer in a town that does not obviously contain the population to support that consumer base. He has managed this for decades. He is large and sedentary and dismissive and self-satisfied, with a completeness that occasionally stops being comedy and starts being a specific kind of portrait. The portrait of someone who found, early enough to matter, a domain in which they could be the most knowledgeable person in the room and who has organized their entire existence around maintaining that position. His contempt for the people who enter his store is partly performance and partly genuine. The performance is the version that the show plays for comedy, the exaggerated condescension, the elaborate put-downs, the tendency to deploy expertise as a weapon rather than a tool. The genuine version is more interesting. He cares about this material with an intensity that the world does not widely share, and the people who enter his store are frequently ignorant of it in ways that genuinely offend him. The contempt is the expression of someone whose love for something has not found the reciprocating audience it deserved. This is a recognizable position. The person whose passion for a specific domain exceeds the social context available for that passion, who has turned expertise into identity because expertise, at least, cannot be taken away. Who is difficult to be around because the difficulty is partly a test if you can get past the difficulty, if you stay and engage with the material he cares about, the contempt has a way of becoming something else. He had a relationship, in one memorable episode, that briefly showed a different version of what he might be if someone chose to stay past the contempt. The episode treated him with genuine gentleness, showing the person underneath the performance lonely, sincere, capable of care in ways that his public persona is designed to conceal. The performance went back up when the episode ended. Of course it did. The performance is protection. Comic book guy in the audience, the figure watching the show, judging it, cataloging its flaws and continuity errors, and the moments when it does not live up to its own standards, is in some ways the show's internal critic made visible. He is the viewer who has watched long enough to see the seams, who takes the material seriously enough to be disappointed when it falls short. The show created this character and gave him the line, "Worst episode ever," as a preemptive acknowledgement that this character existed in the audience too, that some viewers were always going to evaluate with this level of rigorous attachment. That this is actually a form of love, the most demanding kind, the kind that holds the object of affection to the standard of its own best self. Springfield needs this. A town that has built its survival on collective denial, on the agreement to not look too closely, needs someone who looks very closely, even if he looks at the wrong things. Even if his expertise is in fictional narratives rather than radiation contamination. The habit of attention, the refusal to shrug, the insistence that things are either right or not right, these are practices that matter wherever they are applied. Comic book guy is, in his specific way, performing the function that Lisa performs more earnestly. He is refusing to accept the thing as it presents. He is insisting on standards. He is the voice that says this does not meet the criteria, even if the criteria are comic book continuity rather than environmental justice. The habit of insisting is the same habit. The content is different. Extended section, disco stew, and the permanence of personal history. One dao zo zo. Very soft now. The words can be just sound. Disco stew is a man who has refused, for decades, to acknowledge that a specific cultural moment ended. He dresses for a decade that has been over since before many Springfield residents were born. He speaks in the idiom of that moment. He references it, lives in it, maintains it with the specific devotion of someone who found themselves inside something that felt perfect and could not find a reason to leave. The comedy is obvious. The joke is that disco ended, and Stu did not get the memo. The joke is that his commitment to an expired aesthetic is both excessive and endearing, that there is something simultaneously ridiculous and touching about a man so thoroughly invested in a moment that the rest of the world moved past. But look at it from another angle. What if Disco Stu is not delusional? What if he looked at the moment when disco was alive and understood something about it, something about the community it represented, the specific joy it produced, the world it briefly created that the rest of the culture missed when it moved on? What if his refusal to leave is not failure to process the end, but refusal to accept that the end was right? Disco ended partly because of cultural forces specific to its moment, and partly because of a targeted campaign of rejection. The disco demolition night, the radio DJs who systematically worked against it, the cultural machinery that decided this particular joy was not the right kind. The movement was marginalized, with more than ordinary speed and thoroughness. Stu was inside that movement. He found something there. And he did not let it go when the world told him to let it go. This is, viewed generously, a form of integrity. The integrity of someone who refuses to disavow a genuine feeling because social consensus has moved on from it. The willingness to be the last person in the room still dancing. Not because you have not noticed that everyone else has left, but because the music was real and it mattered, and the fact that the room emptied does not make it less real or less true. In Springfield, a town that has mastered the art of collective forgetting, that votes to exile the truth and maintain the comfortable fiction. Disco Stu is the town's most visible example of the opposite tendency. He will not forget, he will not move on. He will maintain the reality of his specific experience against the pressure of a world that has decided to stop acknowledging it. He is, in this light, the show's most consistent portrait of personal historical fidelity. Springfield forgets everything that might require it to change. Stu remembers everything that mattered to him, against all social incentive to stop. There is something quietly heroic in that, alongside all the comedy. Extended section. Kent Brockman and the media in the contamination zone. A little slower. Breathe a little deeper. Kent Brockman is Springfield's television news anchor, and he is one of the show's most consistent portraits of how journalism functions inside a compromised system. He is good on camera. He has the voice, the hair, the specific quality of attention that the television medium rewards a presence that reads as authority without necessarily producing the substance authority is supposed to convey. He has been delivering the news to Springfield for the show's entire run, in a format that the news takes, with the appearance the news wears. What he has not done, what the show has documented across decades of Brockman appearances, is investigate. He has reported on Burns, he has reported on the nuclear plant, he has been in the room when evidence of environmental contamination was presented. He has covered stories that, pursued with anything like journalistic commitment, would have produced the investigation that Springfield's situation clearly requires. He did not pursue them. His reasons are not hidden. The show has been clear about them, distributed across episodes, accumulating into a portrait of a man whose relationship to his work is primarily mediated by his relationship to his own career. Brockman wants to maintain his position. He wants to keep his anchor chair, his salary, his status as the most recognizable face on Springfield's airwaves. Investigation of the kind that would actually serve the community is risky. It produces enemies. It requires the willingness to damage relationships with powerful people who prefer not to be investigated. Burns is the most powerful person in Springfield. Investigating Burns is the most professionally dangerous thing a Springfield journalist could do. Brockman has done the calculation and arrived at the same place as the rest of Springfield's institutional establishment. The cost of honest journalism exceeds what he is willing to pay. This is not unique to Springfield. The relationship between local journalism and local power is everywhere, negotiated in roughly these terms. The local newspaper that depends on local advertising. The local television station that depends on the goodwill of local employers and local politicians. The economic architecture of local media tends to align its financial interests with the interests of the powerful rather than the interests of the investigated. Springfield's media is not independent of Springfield's power structure. It is woven into it economically and socially. Brockman's salary depends on the advertising that flows through his network, which depends on the economic activity that flows through Springfield, which depends on the plant that Burns runs. The causal chain that makes investigating Burns professionally destructive is built into the economic structure of Brockman's professional existence. He knows this. The show suggests he has never quite articulated it to himself in these terms, but that he knows it in practice, as a daily operational fact. He covers what he can cover. He sensationalizes what can be sensationalized without damaging his position. He performs journalism in the space that the system permits. The three-eyed fish story is the show's clearest example. Blinky appears. Brockman covers the story with the urgency of genuine news, the fish with three eyes, the gubernatorial candidate's use of it as evidence against Burns, the public reaction, Burns being forced to eat the fish on live television. This is the story being told. The investigation that should follow the systematic examination of what the plant has done to the water, to the fish, to the people drinking the water does not happen. The story ends with the spectacle of Burns and the fish. The investigative thread disappears. Because pursuing that thread would require Brockman to become someone different from what his professional environment will support. He is, in this, Springfield in a suit. He is the town's collective relationship to information given a face and a camera. He knows what is in front of him. He reports the surface. He goes home to his comfortable life and his comfortable salary, and he does not follow the thread. The extended section, the town meetings, democracy in the contamination zone. Springfield holds town meetings. This is one of its most persistently depicted civic behaviors, the community gathering in the town hall or the school gymnasium or wherever the occasion dictates, for the purpose of collectively addressing the issue at hand. The meetings are always chaotic. They tend to begin with reasonable civic purpose and devolve quickly into the specific kind of argument that happens when a large number of people with different needs and limited patience and impaired critical thinking try to reach consensus on something that actually matters. They also occasionally work, not often, not as efficiently as the situation requires, not in ways that produce the structural change the community's situation demands. But sometimes, in the chaotic space of Springfield's democratic practice, something real happens. A decision is made. A course of action is agreed upon. A portion of the community's collective will find expression in something other than a mob. This is worth more than the comedy suggests. In a town whose population is cognitively impaired by environmental contamination, whose institutional structures are captured by the interests that created the contamination, whose media is too economically compromised to investigate, whose law enforcement is constitutionally incapable of acting in this town, the town meeting is the one remaining mechanism through which something like popular will can be expressed. It is imperfect, spectacularly imperfect. The meetings produce decisions that are wrong more often than right, that are shaped by whoever speaks loudest rather than whoever has the best argument, that are vulnerable to manipulation by anyone with the patience to manage the crowd. Burns has attended these meetings and steered them. Quimby has managed them. Various interested parties have worked the room, but they keep happening. The meetings keep happening. Springfield keeps showing up to argue about things, loudly and ineffectively, and with great passion and limited information. The civic impulse is not extinguished. The desire to participate in the collective determination of the collective life is still there, buried under decades of contamination and denial and institutional failure. Lisa speaks at these meetings. She is consistently one of the few people who arrives with actual information and the capacity to organize it into a coherent argument. She is consistently one of the first people dismissed, shouted down, ignored. The meeting moves on to something louder and less accurate. The decision that gets made is usually the wrong one. But Lisa keeps coming to the meetings. She keeps raising her hand. She keeps making the argument, because the alternative not going, not arguing, accepting that the meetings produce bad outcomes, and therefore declining to participate in producing better ones, is the thing that permanently surrenders the space to the people who benefit from bad outcomes. The meetings are Springfield's most visible site of democratic possibility. Impaired, captured, manipulated, chaotic, but possible. The possibility is the thing worth showing up for. Lisa has understood this for 36 years. She is 8 years old and she keeps showing up. That is not defeat. That is the long game. Very quiet now. Let your thoughts slow all the way down. Every episode of The Simpsons begins with the same sequence. The title card, the theme music, the family rushing from their separate locations, Homer from the plant, Marge and Maggie from the grocery store, Bart from school, Lisa from her music lesson toward the house, the convergence, and then the couch gag, the thing that is never the same twice but is always the same thing. The family arriving at the couch and finding that the couch is different, or the living room is different, or the family themselves are different, or the laws of physics have suspended themselves in some specific way that makes the landing surprising. For 36 years, this has happened. Hundreds of times. And the format has been consistent in its fundamental structure, the rush, the convergence, the couch, while varying every visible detail. What is this? On the surface, it is a comedy device. A gag that announces the episode, a moment of variety inside the ritual of the opening, a space where the show has always been willing to be experimental and playful, and occasionally deeply strange in ways the episode itself might not accommodate. But there is another way to see it. The couch gag is the show's announcement of the loop. Every episode before the story begins, the show performs the basic structural move of Springfield's existence. The family scatters and converges. Reality varies, but the family always arrives at the couch. The landing is always made. The specifics change this week. The family discovers aliens on the couch. Next week, they arrive to find the couch is missing, but the fundamental logic never changes. They come from different directions. They find each other. They land. This is the story Springfield has been telling for 36 years. Across every theory, every mystery, every buried secret, the family scatters and converges. The loop resets. The landing is made. Homer in the coma dreams the couch. Homer, poisoned by the plant, finds his way back to the couch. Homer, whose employer destroyed his family, whose mother was driven away, whose potential was suppressed before he ever had a chance to express it, this Homer, every Sunday, finds his couch. The couch gag is not a joke. It is a promise. It is the show making the same promise it has been making since December 1989. Whatever happens in the episode, whatever Springfield does this week, whatever Burns schemes or Ned endures or Lisa argues or Bart destructs at the end, the family lands. The couch receives them. That is the loop's deepest function, not to trap, to ensure the landing. Springfield is a contamination zone. It is a dream. It is a collective agreement to maintain a fiction. It is a machine built by a billionaire to sustain his own existence at the community's expense. It is all of these things simultaneously, and the show has been honest about all of them. And it is also a place where a family keeps finding each other, week after week, season after season, through every disaster and reset and forgotten catastrophe. The couch is always there. The family always lands. That is the secret after everything. After all the theories and all the buried storylines and all the darkness that lives underneath the yellow surface, the secret is the couch and the family and the landing. Springfield will never be fixed. The loop will never break. The fish will always have 3 eyes. And Homer will always come home. Always. Rest now. You have spent this whole night in Springfield. You know its secrets now, or some of them. You know the love that lives inside the contamination. You know the warmth that the loop was built to preserve. You know that every yellow face and every impossible recovery and every reset has underneath it the same thing. A family that chose each other against all reasonable odds and has been choosing each other every Sunday for 36 years. Let your breathing slow. Let the room be quiet. Springfield is still there. The house is lit. The couch is occupied. Maggie is watching. Homer is probably eating something inadvisable. Marge has the rubber gloves on. Bart is somewhere being 11 in a body that is permanently 10. Lisa is playing the saxophone, very quietly, for herself. The loop continues. You can sleep now. Good night from Springfield. Wherever Springfield is, good night. Expanded deep dive. Homer and Marge, the love story at the center of everything. Still here? Let the voice find you wherever you are. There is no hurry. The night is long and there is so much more of Springfield to walk through. We need to spend more time on the love between Homer and Marge. Because in the whole architecture of Springfield, the radiation, the corruption, the collective amnesia, the impossibility of the geography, the century-old billionaire running his experiments on the population, the love between these two specific people is the thing that does not reduce to theory. It is the thing that exists in the show as something raw and actual, something the satire cannot absorb, something that persists when everything else has been explained. How did they find each other? The show has told this story multiple times. In the specific way that a floating timeline requires, the origin has been retold, reframed, updated to match whatever decade the floating present is currently occupying. They met in high school. They met at a protest. They met in summer school. The details shift. But something about the meeting has always remained consistent. Homer saw Marge and was, in a way that is very specific to his character, immediately and completely undone. This is not sophisticated. Homer's love for Marge is not the result of careful assessment, of reasoned evaluation, of the deliberate recognition of compatible values and complementary natures. It is the specific, overwhelming experience of encountering someone who makes you feel, for the first time, that you might be okay, that you might be a person worth being around, that the world might have room for you in it. Marge was that for Homer. She has always been that, And the show has been careful to show that the feeling is not entirely one-directional, even though Marge's form of love is so different from Homer's that they can be hard to recognize as versions of the same thing. Marge chose Homer when she had alternatives. She could have chosen Artie Ziff, her prom date, a man of greater social status and conventionally better prospects. She chose Homer. She chose the man who was running next to her on the track in high school and could not catch his breath. She chose the impossible one. Why? The show has given us glimpses of the answer. Homer, at his best, the Homer that occasionally surfaces through the fog of the crayon and the radiation and the accumulated impairment of his Springfield existence, is someone worth choosing. He is warm in a way that is real and not performed. He is funny in the way that people are funny when they are not trying to be, when the humor is the product of genuine collision between their internal world and external reality. He is present with the people he loves in a complete way that more conventionally accomplished people often fail to be. Marge chose the warmth. She chose the presence. She looked at Homer and found something worth choosing in a way that the show has always been clear she understands was not the obvious choice. And she has made this choice again and again, across 3 decades of episodes, across every crisis and failure and reset. The choice is ongoing, it is renewed. This is one of the show's most sustained and honest observations about what long love actually is. Long love is not the initial choosing. It is the re-choosing that happens every day. In the daily texture of a shared life. In the accumulated weight of someone who has seen you at your worst and continues to reach for your hand. Marge reaches for Homer's hand. The show returns to this image, quietly and without commentary. In the episodes that let the comedy pause for a moment, the anniversaries, the genuine crises, the moments where something is actually at stake, Marge reaches for Homer's hand. And Homer, despite everything, is there for her to reach. There is an episode widely considered among the show's finest, a meditation on long marriage and the specific way that the familiar can become invisible, where Homer realizes that Marge is unhappy. Not dramatically unhappy, not in crisis, but quietly, persistently dissatisfied in the specific way of someone who has been maintaining something for a long time without acknowledgement. He sees this. He pays attention in a way that Homer does not always manage to pay attention. And his response is not defensiveness, it is action. He tries. He fails at the first attempt, and the second, and the third, and he keeps trying because the alternative, Marge being unhappy and Homer not doing anything about it, is not something his particular form of love can accommodate. He made her a waffle iron, not the romantic gesture the situation called for, the waffle iron. And Marge, who knows Homer, who has spent decades learning to receive the love he is actually capable of giving rather than the love the situation theoretically requires, is moved by it. This is the language of their love. Imperfect gesture, received by someone who understands the gesture's actual meaning. Translation accomplished through the specific intimacy of 2 people who have been each other's primary companion for 36 years. The show has put their marriage in genuine jeopardy enough times that you can feel the writers taking the question seriously, is this sustainable? Can these 2 people, with these specific gaps between them, keep making it work? The threats have been real. Marge's dissatisfaction is real. Homer's failures are real. The communication gap between them, the way Homer cannot always express what he feels, and the way Marge cannot always ask for what she needs is real. And every time, the show has them choose each other. Not because there is no alternative. Not because leaving would be harder than staying. Because the choosing is what they keep doing. And the choosing is who they are. The most romantic moment in the show's history is almost impossible to identify because the show has been doing romantic moments so consistently, in so many registers, for so long. But one candidate is the episode where Homer, faced with the certainty of losing Marge because he cannot be what she needs, stands in front of her and says something very simple. He is not eloquent. He does not have the vocabulary for what he is trying to say, but the feeling is there, enormous, ungainly. Genuine. She stays. Not because of the words. The words were inadequate. She stays because she has learned to see through Homer's inadequate words to what is underneath them, and what is underneath them is always the same thing. She is his whole world. She has always been his whole world. In the contamination zone, in the coma dream, in the collective denial of Springfield, she is the fixed point. And she knows it. That is why she stays. Not because she could not leave, because she knows she is his fixed point, and leaving would not just be leaving Homer, it would be taking away the thing that holds him together. And Marge, for all her frustration, for all the legitimate longing for a version of her life that does not require this level of patient maintenance, cannot do that to the specific person who loves her in this specific way. This is not martyrdom. This is a form of love that the comedy format consistently undersells because it is quieter than the big romantic gesture, because it lives in the ordinary rather than the exceptional, because it does not announce itself. Marge and Homer, Homer and Marge. The show found this combination in 1989 and has been returning to it for 36 years because it found something real in it, something that does not reduce to joke or theory or environmental explanation. Two people choosing each other in a loop that will not break, in a town that was never designed for them to be okay, they are okay. Expanded deep dive. Bart and his teachers, the education that did not take. Let yourself drift a little further. The words can carry you. Bart Simpson has been in the 4th grade for 36 years. He has been Mrs. Krabappel's student or the teacher in her position, or the seat she occupies in Springfield Elementary's institutional structure for longer than most real 4th graders have been alive. The 4th grade is a specific moment in childhood, old enough to have internalized the basic rules of the social world, young enough to still be testing which rules are real and which are negotiable. The grade where a child's relationship to learning, whether it is a source of pleasure or a source of shame, whether the classroom is a place they can belong or a place they are marked as outside of, becomes fixed in ways that are difficult to change later. Bart's relationship to learning was marked very early, and it was marked badly. He was identified as a problem before he was identified as a person. The school saw the behavior and organized itself around managing the behavior rather than understanding the person behind it. This is an institutional failure, not a personal one. The school lacks the resources, the training, the capacity for the kind of individualized attention that Bart's specific situation actually requires. But the institutional failure produces a personal consequence. Bart, in the early grades, learned that the classroom was a place where his natural energy and intelligence were treated as disruptions to be managed, rather than qualities to be channeled. Once you have learned this, it is very difficult to unlearn. The show has returned to this theme through multiple teacher characters, different adults who enter Bart's educational orbit and produce, for the duration of their episode, a different relationship to learning. The substitute teacher who actually engages with Bart's intelligence. The coach who sees athletic potential and creates a context in which Bart can excel. The mentor figure whose attention briefly opens a door that the regular classroom keeps closed. These relationships are the show's most explicit argument about what education can be and what it frequently is instead. The difference between the teacher who reaches Bart and the teacher who writes Bart off is not content knowledge or credential or years of experience. It is attention. The willingness to see the specific child in front of you rather than the category of child the institution has decided you are dealing with. Mrs. Krabappel, over 36 years, has moved back and forth on this axis. She began as a figure of institutional exhaustion, a teacher who had stopped believing that her students could surprise her, who managed Bart with the efficiency of a system that has decided it knows what it is dealing with. The comedy of her early appearances is built on this: the teacher who has given up, the class who knows it, the mutual low expectations that produce the specific kind of classroom stasis the show depicts. But the show did something more interesting with her over time. It let her be a full person. It let her have a life that extended beyond the classroom, that had its own desires and disappointments and history that made the burned-out teacher comprehensible rather than merely comic. She was a woman who had wanted more from her professional life and from her personal life, who was making a particular peace with what was available, who had residues of the person she had intended to be present in her interactions, if you knew how to look for them. And Bart sometimes found them. In the episodes that gave their relationship room to breathe, that allowed the mutual exasperation to become something more specific, that let them see each other for a moment outside the teacher-student dynamic, there was something genuine between them. A recognition. She knew him better than she admitted. He was more affected by her opinion than he showed. Her death was the show's most honest acknowledgement of what she had meant. No joke, just the name on the blackboard, just the space where she had been. Bart's relationship to reading is one of the show's most quietly sustained threads. He cannot read well, Or he can read but won't. Or he reads at a level below what his intelligence should produce, in the specific way of someone who learned to avoid the thing that marks the difference between where he is and where he is supposed to be. The reading struggle is both cause and effect. He struggles because he avoided it early, and he avoided it because the classroom made struggling with reading a source of shame rather than a stage in a process. Lisa reads voraciously, demonstrably, with the pleasure of someone for whom the act of reading is itself a source of satisfaction. Bart cannot look at a book without it becoming a referendum on his adequacy. The same activity produces opposite associations for the two children who share the same household, the same parents, the same contaminated environment. This difference is not genetic. It is not radiation. It is the specific, documentable difference between a child whose early learning experiences were positive and a child whose were not. Lisa was seen as the smart one early enough for that seeing to shape her identity. Bart was seen as the problem early enough for that seeing to do the same. The school built the identities. The school keeps building them. Springfield Elementary produces, year after year, a specific kind of graduate, someone who has learned that the world's institutions are not designed for them, that the structures of authority and expectation are enforced rather than earned, that compliance is required but not rewarded. These are the lessons of Bart's education. He has learned them well. The lesson he has not been taught, the one the school keeps failing to deliver, is what to do with the intelligence he has. He is still waiting. Expanded deep dive. Lisa and music, the thing that cannot be taken away. Let the breath go long and slow. The room is quiet. Music is the one place in Lisa's life where the gap between how things are and how they should be is not a source of pain. In music, the gap is the material. The tension between what the melody implies and what the harmony resolves to. The distance between expectation and arrival. The space between notes where the music actually lives. Lisa found the saxophone at a young age, in the specific way that some people find the thing that was always waiting for them, not as a discovery but as a recognition. This is mine. This is what was missing. This is where I can be all of what I am without any of it being too much. She plays jazz. This is important. She did not settle into the most accessible form of her instrument. She went to the most demanding, most historically complex, most intellectually rich tradition available to her. Jazz requires you to know the rules precisely enough to understand how to break them productively. It requires the ability to improvise, to respond to what is happening now, rather than executing what was planned. It requires a particular kind of intelligence that is not about storing information, but about processing it in real time. Making connections on the fly, listening as carefully as playing. Lisa has been doing all of these things in her non-musical life since she was born. She was waiting for the form that matched the function. The saxophone is also, and this matters, specifically uncool at Springfield Elementary. It is not the instrument of social success. It does not produce the kind of peer recognition that social success in elementary school requires. It marks her as further outside the center of things, further from the norm that the school enforces. She plays it anyway. She practices late at night in her room when the house is quiet, with a dedication that the house's noisiness usually prevents from being acknowledged. She practices for herself, not for performance. She practices because the practice itself is what she needs. This is the purest form of the thing, when you do something for itself rather than for what it produces. When the doing is the reward rather than the outcome, Lisa plays because playing is its own return. The audience is secondary. The recognition is beside the point. The saxophone is hers in a way that nothing else in Springfield is hers. Burns cannot contaminate it. The collective denial cannot dismiss it. The floating timeline cannot freeze it. She plays it, and it is hers, and it is real, and it is exactly as good as it actually is, without adjustment, without the Springfield discount that gets applied to every other thing she values. Her musical influences are significant. Bleeding Gums Murphy, the jazz musician she encountered as a child and who became her most important musical mentor, is one of the show's most fully realized minor characters. He was a man who had sacrificed everything for his music and found in the sacrifice a specific kind of completeness that conventional success could not have offered. He was not famous. He was not comfortable. He had a past that the show touches lightly, the teeth that gave him his name, the hard-living history of the working jazz musician, the decades of playing in spaces where the audience was small and the money was smaller, and the music was real, he took Lisa seriously as a musician. He did not condescend. He did not offer the simplified version. He played with her as an equal, in the specific way of musicians who recognize talent and respond to it by raising the level of the exchange. His death was the show's first real acknowledgement that loss is real, that the floating timeline does not protect against it, that some things that end cannot be reset. Lisa's grief was allowed to be actual grief. The episode did not fix it by the end. It sat with her in it, and the saxophone became the place where the grief could live, where it could be played rather than suppressed. Music is the thing that cannot be taken from Lisa. And in a town organized around taking Burns, taking the plant's value from the community, the system taking Homer's intelligence, the denial taking the truth, the existence of one thing that cannot be taken is significant. She guards it accordingly. Expanded deep dive. The Simpsons in class what the show actually says about money. Something that the show has been doing consistently for 36 years. That discussion of it often underweights because the comedy makes it invisible. The Simpsons is a show about economic anxiety. Homer's salary at the nuclear plant is the show's most consistently present economic fact. He earns enough to sustain a family in a house that the show depicts as modest but functional in the specific way of American working-class aspiration. The house on Evergreen Terrace is not the house of someone who has made it, but it is the house of someone who has not yet given up on making it. There is a gap between what the family has and what they would need to feel secure. There is always a gap. This gap produces the texture of the show's economic life. The bills that are slightly more concerning than they should be. The decisions between competing needs where the money does not quite stretch to both. Homer's various entrepreneurial schemes, pursued with enthusiasm and abandoned with consistency, almost always originate in the gap between what the family earns and what the family needs or wants. He is not content, but he does not know how to be otherwise. He tries things and they do not work, and he goes back to the plant. The plant is permanent. The plant is the anchor. Whatever else Homer tries, the plant is what he returns to. Because the plant is what is guaranteed by the deal with Grandpa, by Burns's need for a specific kind of incompetent employee, by the whole structure of Springfield's economic dependence on the plant's continued operation, Homer cannot really lose this job. And this means he can never really fight for something better. The safety net is also the cage. The show has been explicit about this class position. Homer is a working man. He works. He comes home tired. He earns a wage rather than a salary in the meaningful sense, a wage that requires his continued presence and labor in exchange for continued payment. He has no equity. He has no passive income. He has the house, which the show has allowed to depreciate and appreciate comically across its run without ever quite establishing its real value. He has the car. He has the television and the couch and the beer. He has the family. The family is, in the economic language the show uses, his real wealth. It is the thing he has that Burns does not have, that the economic system he operates in cannot quantify or capture. Homer does not have capital, he has love. And the show has spent 36 years quietly, consistently making the case that this is not nothing. The contrast with Burns is the show's most explicit class argument. Burns has everything money can buy, including the one thing that should be outside money's reach: extended life. He has used his wealth to purchase decades that the rest of Springfield's residents do not have access to. He has used it to purchase protection, comfort, the insulation of someone who never has to encounter the consequences of his decisions. He has used it to ensure his own survival at the direct expense of the community around him. And he is not happy. The show makes this point again and again. Burns is not experiencing satisfaction. He is experiencing continuation. He is alive and powerful and rich, and he does not enjoy any of it in the way that enjoyment requires the capacity to be present with something. Burns is always managing, always strategizing, always maintaining the machinery of his own existence. He has not had a moment of unguarded pleasure in what may be decades. Homer eats a donut with complete, enthusiastic, total presence. This is not a joke. It is the show making its class argument in miniature. Homer, who has almost nothing by the standards of the world Burns inhabits, is capable of the kind of pleasure that Burns has engineered himself out of being able to access. Homer is present in his life in a way that Burns, for all his resources, cannot be. This is the show's consistent and unspoken economic thesis. The system that Burns represents, the system that has organized Springfield around his continued enrichment and survival, does not produce the thing that makes life worth living. It produces continuation without presence, wealth without warmth, power without pleasure. Homer, who the system broke before he could threaten it, who has been maintained in the specific dysfunction that makes him useful, has managed inside that dysfunction to find the thing the system cannot produce. And he finds it on the couch. And he finds it in the donut. And he finds it in his wife's hand in the dark. The system missed this. The system cannot find this. The system does not know what to do with this. That is the show's deepest joke. The billionaire spent a century arranging the world to his advantage, and the man he broke for the purpose of his advantage has more of what matters than the billionaire has managed to accumulate. Homer is richer than Burns. He just does not know it, because knowing it would require the capacity for sustained reflection that the crayon prevents. And so the joke continues. And the loop continues, and Homer keeps running toward the couch. Slow breath, slow thought, let the words be just sound for a while. What does it cost to not age? We talk about the floating timeline as a convenience, as the production decision that allows the show to run indefinitely without requiring the characters to grow into adults and the story to become something different. This is accurate. It is a decision made for practical reasons. Long-running animated shows do not age their characters because aging their characters would eventually require ending the show, and shows do not tend to choose to end. But what does it cost the characters? If you take the show's world seriously for a moment, if you sit inside the reality it has built rather than the production logic behind it, what does it mean for a person to exist inside a loop that never advances? For Homer, the cost is strange and possibly merciful. Homer cannot accumulate wisdom across time in the way that normal aging allows. He cannot become a better husband, father, or employee through the process of learning from experience because the experience does not accumulate, it resets. Each episode produces a lesson that the next episode forgets. He is always in the middle of figuring something out, always on the verge of understanding something about himself or his family or the world, and never quite arriving at the understanding because the arrival would require time that the loop does not permit. This is, depending on how you read it, tragic or kind. Tragic because Homer is denied the normal growth of personhood. Kind because Homer, whose baseline condition is one of significant cognitive limitation, is also spared the accumulation of regret that growing older while making the same mistakes over and over would otherwise produce. He forgets the failures. The slate is clean. He can try again next Sunday. For Lisa, the cost is different and more specifically painful. Lisa accumulates within episodes. She develops, she grows, she arrives at understandings that feel genuine and hard-won and important. And then the episode ends, and the understanding is gone. She is back to being 8, with the same knowledge she had at the beginning, smart, isolated, idealistic, waiting for the world to become what she believes it can be. She never gets the world she believes in. The reset always comes. Every cause she champions either fails in the episode or is simply not referenced in the episodes that follow. So the cumulative record of Lisa's activism is one of continuous effort without visible consequence. She fights the same battles repeatedly, without the advantage of having fought them before, without the scar tissue that sustained loss would normally provide. What does this do to a person? The show does not quite ask this. It cannot ask it because asking it would require acknowledging the cost, and acknowledging the cost would make Lisa's situation too dark for the comedy format to hold. But the cost is there. Lisa is perpetually at the beginning of understanding something that she has, in some sense, already understood. She is always approaching her breakthrough, always almost seeing what she needs to see, and the loop resets before the seeing becomes permanent. For Bart, the loop is simultaneously his punishment and his reprieve. His punishment because he never gets to outgrow the role the town assigned him, the troublemaker, the underachiever, the kid who will not apply himself. His reprieve because he never has to face the long-term consequences of the choices the show has him make, never has to live in the version of his future where all the potential wasted in the 4th grade adds up to an adult life that reflects the waste. The reset protects Bart from his own trajectory. It is simultaneously the most unfair thing that happens to him and the luckiest. For Maggie, the loop is most interesting of all. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 seasons. She has been in the position of maximum potential, the position of someone whose future is completely open, whose capabilities are as yet undemonstrated, whose nature is still being formed for longer than any person should be able to occupy that position. She is permanent potential. She will never actualize because actualization requires time, and the loop denies her time. She is forever in the moment before the becoming, and perhaps this is why she watches so carefully. She is the only one in the family for whom the loop is complete, for whom every moment is equally the present, for whom nothing has been lost to the reset because nothing has yet been established. She is, in a specific sense, the only character in Springfield for whom the floating timeline is not a cost. She is the loop's one perfect inhabitant. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa all pay the price of the loop. They lose their growth, their accumulation, their movement through time. Maggie pays nothing. She arrives at each episode exactly as she was, having lost nothing, having gained nothing, watching everything with the same enormous patient eyes, until the moment she decides to act. And then everything will have been preparation. Last section now. Let yourself get very quiet. The show's creators have said, in various interviews across the years, that Springfield was always intended to be America. Not a specific part of America, not a region or a class or a demographic America. The whole thing. The aspiration and the failure, the warmth and the cruelty, the community and the corruption, the family love and the institutional rot. All of it in one impossible town that is located everywhere because it is located in the national imagination rather than on any particular map. If this is true and the show has sustained the argument convincingly across 36 years, then everything we have been talking about tonight is not just about a fictional community in a cartoon. It is about what America has been and what it is doing to itself. The nuclear plant is real. Not Springfield's specific plant, but the principle of it, the industrial facility whose continued operation depends on a regulatory environment that it has shaped to its advantage, that employs enough of the local population to make itself politically untouchable, that produces contamination it has arranged to not pay for. This exists. This has been existing since the industrial age. The fictional specificity of Homer's plant is built on the actual specificity of an industrial model that prioritizes profit over community health while maintaining the appearance of being the community's benefactor. Burns is real. Not as an individual, the show's specific construction of Burns is too deliberately monstrous to be a realistic portrait of any single person, but as a type. The inherited wealth that predates accountability. The man whose fortune is old enough to have outlasted the moment when it could have been challenged. The billionaire who has so thoroughly captured the institutions meant to hold him accountable that accountability has become theoretical. This person exists. There are multiple of them. The show drew Burns from observation. Homer is real. The working person who is too impaired by poverty, by inadequate education, by the accumulated stress of precarious employment, by the specific cognitive load of maintaining a family without resources to see clearly the system that is impairing him. The person who works for the company that is hurting him because working for the company is the only option available, and the only option is available because the system has been arranged to make it the only option. This person is everywhere. They are the majority. Marge is real. The person who holds the structure together, who maintains the warmth inside conditions that should not allow warmth to persist, who does the invisible labor that keeps the household and the family and the community functioning without ever being credited for it, who has wants of her own that the structure consistently defers. This person is everywhere. The show has been talking about this person and to this person for 36 years. Lisa is real. The person who sees what is actually happening, who has the education and the clarity and the moral framework to articulate it, who keeps making the argument even when the argument loses, who cannot find the audience she needs in the community she is in, who sometimes despairs and then comes back. Because despair is not the same as defeat. This person exists. They are often very tired. Bart is real. The kid the system decided was a problem before it decided what the problem was. The person whose intelligence and energy could have been channeled into something extraordinary if anyone had been paying the right kind of attention at the right time. The person who learned that institutions were not designed for people like him and who learned this too young to protect himself from internalizing it. This person is everywhere. The school system produces them continuously. Maggie is real, the quiet potential, the thing that is being prepared in the absence of recognition. The next thing, accumulating in the margins, watching everything, waiting for the right moment. In every generation, in every community, in every system that thinks it has managed all its variables, there is a Maggie. Something it did not plan for. Something that sees it clearly. Something that has been watching and is now almost ready. Springfield is America. The floating timeline is America's relationship to its own history, the national preference for the comfortable present over the accurate past, the collective decision to not look too carefully at the things that would require uncomfortable responses, the vote to maintain the fiction rather than exile the truth. The contamination is America's industrial history. The corruption is America's political economy. The warmth is America's most resilient and most persistent quality, the love people make inside the systems that degrade them, the community that forms despite everything, the specific genius of ordinary people for finding each other and building something worth having in the spaces the powerful left uncurated. The show has been saying all of this for 36 years. Not loudly, not didactically, in the language of comedy, which is the language that gets past the defenses, in the language of character, which is the language that reaches the heart, in the slow, patient, episodic accumulation of a world that is simultaneously impossible and completely recognizable. Springfield is not a satire of America. Springfield is America's dream of itself, the version where the nuclear plant is visible, where the corruption is legible, where the good man's goodness is real even when it is impaired, where the family keeps making it despite everything, where the truth is being carried by an 8-year-old who will not stop arguing for it. The dream where things are not fine but the people inside them are okay. The dream where the family is still on the couch, where Homer is still running toward them, where Marge still holds everything together, where Bart is still becoming something, where Lisa is still playing the saxophone, very quietly, for herself, where Maggie is still watching, still waiting, and now you can rest. You have spent this whole night here, in Springfield, in the permanent present of a town that refuses to end, with the people who refuse to give up on each other, in the middle of a system that was never designed for them to be okay. You know their secrets now. You know the love underneath the contamination and the warmth inside the loop, and the extraordinary things that ordinary people build when the system fails them completely. Carry that with you into the morning. And if you made it all the way here, if you are still awake, or if you are drifting, or if this was the voice that kept you company while you fell asleep, thank you. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. Thank you for caring about these impossible yellow people in their impossible town. Drop a comment when you wake up. Tell us where you watched from and what time it was and whether Springfield feels different to you now, and subscribe if this was worth your night. Sleep well, wherever you are. The loop continues. Good night.